Consequence Podcast Network.
My friendship to all of you precludes my involvement with any one of you. But if you wanna make love, then I do too, and I'll be right there behind you. All in the name of oh, all in the name of oh, all in the name of oh.
Greetings, constant listeners, and welcome to the Losers Club, a Stephen King podcast presented by the Consequence Podcast Network. I'm Michael Rothman, editor-in-chief and president of Consequence of Sound, and I'm here with my co-hosts...
Randall Colburn, the rockin' one.
And Mackenzie Gerber.
Now, you can hear us pretty well, right? I think so. That's
Yes.
because we're recording from a studio here in Chicago, Illinois. That wasn't always the case, though. When we started this podcast, we were actually huddled around an old Yeti microphone in Mac's apartment that he doesn't even live in anymore.
That's right.
And there were not 4 or 3 of us. There were like 6 or 7. So we wanted to go back to our older episodes and make sure that you, constant listener, actually have a good grasp on knowing that this is not how it's always going to sound. You know, it's a very rough quality, and we just happen to have that rough quality over Stephen King's most iconic books. So
Yeah, it's rough. But I'd say, for Carrie, Salem's Lot, The Shining, Rage, and The Stand, I believe.
Night Shift, too.
And
Night Shift.
Yeah.
We recorded those episodes in a very sort of primitive way, doing our best. That was before we got our studio, which makes us sound so lovely.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you'll notice that the audio quality is going to be a little bit not up to par, but I'd say the content of the conversations are still very, very good. I'm very proud of the analysis we did. You'll notice a few other changes too, like in these early episodes, we talk about everything.
Everything.
Yeah, we didn't now we stretch our legs a bit. We do separate episodes for the movies, for other things. And for here, we're basically like, let's talk about all the Stephen King news, as well as the book, as well as the films, as well as the plays, as well as everything. So these episodes run long. Well, I mean, a lot of ours do, but these run extra long because we're talking about those things. And you'll also notice that kind of the way that we break down our conversations now is a little bit different. We refine that over time.
Yeah.
So yeah, you'll notice that it's a little bit rougher, but it's the same quality Losers Club content
And
that
these,
you've always wanted.
these episodes nearly killed us. The Night Shift episode, I got the flu because we recorded everything.
We
in one
recorded
day.
for 11 hours straight,
Yeah.
I think.
Two
Yeah.
episodes back to back covering all 20 stories?
All 20 stories
And the movies.
And the movies. It was exhausting. I think towards the end of the episode, I started fading away.
Dan started crying.
Dan started crying. I cried in the Shining episode, I believe.
Yeah.
So yeah, these episodes are special.
They're very good episodes.
They're very special episodes, but we did want to make sure that you didn't go into this podcast thinking that it's going to sound like this forever. Because obviously, as you could hear from us right now, that's just not the case.
Yeah, if you're just popping in to hear like, oh, I love Salem's Lot, I'm going to check out this new podcast. Why does it sound like they're recording underwater? You know, we just never really thought that. I think that, you know, we were testing things out. We were seeing if anybody would even care if we did this podcast. And luckily, a lot of you guys did care, and you listened and supported us and followed us on social media. And so we were able to, you know, beef up the sound, make things sound better, expand our lineup, and refine the way that we do things as it is now. So.
Because so much has changed since 2017, not only with us, but the whole world at large. And you're going to hear about all of it as you're journeying through each one of these episodes. So why don't we let you continue your journey through King's Dominion with Salem's Lot.
Thank you for joining us for our second episode on Stephen King's 1975 book, Salem's Lot. Thank you so much if you listened to last week's episode on Carrie. It was our first episode, a labor of love. We're still working out, some of the audio issues, so thanks for sticking through it with us. We think we've got a better handle on it this week. And before we get going, I would just love to encourage you, because this is a new podcast, if you could write us a review in iTunes, Stitcher, subscribe to the podcast if you haven't yet. These are ways to, boost engagement with the podcast, get more people interested. We really want to keep doing this, and we really love doing this. So tell your friends, tell your family, tell your fellow Stephen King fans to listen in, because we want hang out with all of you. Before we get going, we'd love to just go around and talk about how we first encountered Salem's Lot. If this book has a personal meaning, did we grow up with it? Is it a new book in our lives? And sort of, was there a special edition of it that you read? I'll start. Again, my name is Randall Colburn. I'm a senior staff writer at Consequence of Sound. And Salem's Lot, I actually had a hardcover edition of it that I got from my local library. It was probably maybe the 6th or 7th Stephen King book that I read, because, you know, when I got into them, I went pretty hard. I would go to the library and, run to that section and grab whichever one I hadn't read yet. And, you know, it was covered in sort of that plastic wrap that was on a lot of the hardcovers from that era. And there was no illustrations or anything, nothing fancy, just the text. But I remember at the time it was up there with The Shining in terms of the scariest Stephen King books that I've read. And what's interesting is as I've gotten older, I don't sort of credit it as being maybe the scariest Stephen King book anymore, but there's so much things that are scary on sort of a grander cultural scale that I think affected me a lot more when I was young. So I remember this was a book that I really only read during daylight. It was a little too scary for me to read right before bed. But I have a lot of affection for this one. It was an early one for me. Now we're going to move over to Mike.
Hey, this is Mike Rothman. I'm the editor-in-chief over at Consequence of Sound, and I actually had never read Salem's Lot prior to doing this podcast, and it was always one that was kind of in the back burner for the Stephen King novels that I'd had in my possession. But I had seen Tobe Hooper's film. I guess that's what you're going to probably realize concurrently with these episodes is that I've seen the films before I've seen before I actually sat down to read the books. But I wasn't really a huge fan of the movie, though. I'm never really big on vampires for some reason. I understand that it's a great medium to kind of talk about society and different perspectives and gender, and it's just a great vehicle for writers to use. But they just never really resonated so much for me, and so it'll be interesting to talk about it today because I did actually have a wild time reading this book. So this is a lot of fun.
Nice. I'm Mackenzie Gerber. I'm co-host of Gerber and Gerber on Consequence of Sound, and I just read this book about a month ago for the first time. My introduction to it was kind of scattered. I think the idea of vampires and whatnot was a huge thing in my childhood. I loved Lost Boys, Near Dark, anything I could get my hands on. So I was quite the opposite of you. I actually loved vampires growing up.
Yeah.
And I never got a chance to read the book. I think I saw part of the miniseries when I was a kid, but not the whole thing. So I was really excited to delve into this and see what King has to say about the old vampires.
Hi, and I'm Justin Gerber. I'm Mackenzie's brother, again, co-host of Gerber and Gerber, a web series on Consequence of Sound. Please check us out. Please subscribe to that as well. That's a side plug. Hope you don't mind. And for me, like Randall, Salem's Lot was one of the earlier King books I read as well. As a matter of fact, the copy I brought with us today, the one I read again, is from that time, and actually at the top it says, from the author of Gerald's Game. So that's how old this copy is. It's beaten to hell, but I've read it. This is my third go-around of reading Salem's Lot.
Honestly, I reread this one a lot.
Yeah.
And I remember my high school girlfriend, I actually bought her a copy of this book, like a newer edition of it. I remember this was back in, the early 2000s. And because I really wanted her to read it, and then she told me it was too scary. And I was very bummed. And then we broke up. It wasn't because of that.
I was going to say.
That would be pretty funny. Why are you trying to scare me, Randall?
I know, but it was a book that I think has always meant a lot to me in the Stephen King universe. I don't know why, but we'll talk about that. There's plenty to discuss. But before we get deep into Salem's Lot, we want to just share some, what's going on in Stephen King land. And with that, we've got Needful Tweet.
He's not a human being. Don't you see what he's done? Kill them all. Let God sort them out.
Yeah, it was a busy 2 weeks, I'll say, for Stephen King. If you couldn't tell from the last podcast, or even just following Stephen King yourself on Twitter, he gets a little political. on the social networks, which is great. And I think that it's no surprise that he is political, considering that politics definitely inform his books. So obviously we all know that Donald J. Trump is our president, our 45th president. Right? So that was not such a great moment in our history, and also it's not something that Stephen King is very happy about. So a lot of his tweets this past week were dedicated to that, and he's been very very clairvoyant with a lot of or very transparent. That's a better word for basically going against Trump. The last tweet that he was pretty busy on the inauguration day. So one of his tweets was, "Trump is only supposed to get his salary while president. He is in violation of the Constitution's emoluments clause. Check it for yourself." So it's good that he's actually getting out there, and he's kind of doing his own sort of rallying against
reaching out to
himself
his
and,
millions of followers.
He's not alone. I mean, pretty much every celebrity is doing that right now. And one of the funny things, he retweeted something from David Johns that said Trump breaks his first presidential promise in record time. The hats at the inaugural were made in China. And one of the great tweets, which we actually retweeted on the Losers Club Twitter, which you should follow us on Twitter for sure, or Facebook or Instagram. Instagram will be fun because we're going to be posting some weird photos of ourselves on there. But not just ourselves, but Stephen King stuff. We're not going to get that weird. But basically, a couple days ago on January 20th, actually yesterday, he wrote, "Welcome to the age of plunder, bluster, and empty rhetoric. In other words, to the age of dumb. If you voted for him, you're responsible." And the day before that, he said, "I wish anyone other than Donald Trump, left, right, or center, were taking the oath of office tomorrow. My preference would be Barack Obama." And he went against Toby Keith. He said, "I love Toby Keith. Great country artist, supports the troops. Hopefully he'll play the draft dodger rag for Trump at the inaugural bash." And he did step aside and wasn't as political on a couple of things. I know politics, people get angry from that, but I think he's great at I think he's just fucking great at it. 6 days ago, he wrote, "Ringling Brothers closing down, but will be replaced by the Pennywise Traveling Terror Tour. Bring the kids. Pennywise has balloons. Hooray."
That's good.
So that's pretty good. And then he also gave a shout out to William Peter Blatty, who he said, "So long, old Bill." So that was nice.
But yeah, and then also there was another big piece of notable news in the Stephen King universe that honestly I don't get sad, or I'm not personally affected too often when celebrities pass. But I actually found myself very struck and very moved by the passing of Miguel Ferrer, who is sort of a stalwart character actor. You might know him from RoboCop. You might know him from Blank Check, which right. I just rewatched, even though that's not a movie he probably wants to be remembered for. But Miguel Ferrer was also a Stephen King regular. He played Lloyd Henreid in The Stand, and he was the lead in the adaptation of The Night Flyer. Was that an adaptation or was it an original?
That was an adaptation.
It was. Story. That was a story. Yeah. Was that in Nightmares and Dreamscapes, I believe?
Yes.
I could be wrong.
So.
But but Miguel Ferrer was the star of that, and I feel like he might have popped up in another. Oh, he was also in Twin Peaks. I mean, that's not King, but but horror fans I think probably enjoyed him from that.
And I think he was Stephen King's favorite character in the miniseries The Stand. Like he championed his work in that.
Ferrer was a great actor. He was always consistent. He was always a little bit strange, and he was always sort of a very charismatic presence. And he could always sort of exude menace, even when he was playing a bad guy in Blank Check. He's almost a little too scary for that.
He's definitely falls into the character. He falls into the category of the it's that guy. So whenever you see him pop up, it was always a pleasant thing. Oh, Miguel Ferrer's in this. This is great.
If you couldn't tell on the podcast, a few of us are sick, but so this week I was actually home watching a lot of movies and reading a lot, and I did actually watch the miniseries of The Stand just because I had the flu, so why not watch a film about everyone dying from it? And just watching his performance as Lloyd is it's heartbreaking. He's so good in that movie, and I actually reached out to you, Randall, just about the obituary the other day, just because I know how much you loved him. So it was hard writing that. It's because it's so he has so much that he on his resume that to actually with these obituaries that we have to write them, like you have to kind of chisel it down to the essentials and stuff, and it's so hard with him because there's so much. Like it's just a wide swath of like work that you just go check out his work.
Yeah. And whenever I talk about Miguel Ferrer, I do need to bring up the greatest VHS cover of all time, which Miguel Ferrer was in a movie called The Harvest that came out in the early 90s, I believe. It's a pretty forgotten film. But Miguel Ferrer was actually the star, and it's a movie about organ harvesting. It's an action film. And the tagline of the movie is, they took his kidney and told him he could live with only one. Now they want that one, too.
Oh!
The Harvest. I would say don't seek out the movie, but seek out the VHS cover.
Maybe if we find it, we can post it on Instagram.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's start with the synopsis of Salem's Lot, which there is a lot to discuss here. We actually have two synopses to read. One is from a later edition of Salem's Lot, and another is from an earlier edition. And Mac, why don't you read, and what edition is that exactly?
I'm not actually sure when this one came out.
It was recent though, because those are the new reissues.
I would say 2011 maybe.
Yeah, so
2003. Okay, here we go. Ben Mears has returned to Jerusalem's Lot in the hopes that living in an old mansion, long the subject of town lore, will help him cast out his devils and provide inspiration for his new book. But when two young boys venture into the woods and only one comes out alive, Mears begins to realize that there may be something sinister at work, and that his hometown is under siege by forces of darkness far beyond his control.
All right. Sounds intriguing. And then, how about your edition?
This, again, is about 20-some-odd years old. This is the Gerald's Game.
And it says from the author of Gerald's Game, which I find very curious. I guess I never realized Gerald's Game was like a bestseller.
Well, I think that I'm assuming these paperback reissues came out around the time of the hardcover of Gerald's Game being released.
That's a good point.
Very simple. Here's the back of this particular edition. The town knew darkness, but no one dared talk about the high, sweet, evil laughter of a child and the sucking sounds. That's it. And guess what? I'm reading this book. If I read that,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
sure. Sounds interesting.
Well, it's interesting because we don't know what sucking sounds is supposed to be, and with Stephen King's sexual background, it's
it could be anything. I'm hooked in though.
Speaking of sucking sounds, the original title of Salem's Lot was actually Second Coming, which his wife Tabitha
That's right.
Told him not to use because it sounded like, I believe the phrase was, like a pulpy porno novel or something like that.
Second Coming.
Which is hilarious. And then he changed the title to Jerusalem's Lot, but I believe the publisher thought it sounded too religious. Yeah. And so he shortened it to Salem's Lot, which was something he used in the book.
Ah, yes. Don't you see? Don't you see how clear it all is? Not only can you see the future, I can change it. You can change it, exactly.
So as we get going, there's a few things to touch on in terms of the origins of Salem's Lot, things that Stephen King has said about where the book came from. There's a lot of, different ways to look at that. Just in terms of the town itself, people have asked if it was based on a real town, which Stephen King says, well, yes and no. When he was younger, he drove by a town called Jeremiah's Lot, and he was told by his friend that every person in that town had just mysteriously vanished one day. I believe back in 1098, as far back as that, they just simply disappeared. People's there were meals on the counter, and I don't know. I'm trying to think of what else was around in 1098 that would be sitting out.
Horses were wandering around?
Horses were wandering around, maybe. And he was very struck by that idea of a town being completely emptied out, which is an idea he revisited in Storm of the Century, I believe, many years later. And but he carried that idea with him. And then he was teaching at the time, and he was teaching Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, and he was intrigued by the idea of, what if a vampire came into modern society? To which his wife responded, wisely. She seems like a great sounding board for him. She said, well, he'd probably get run over by a cab, in New York City. And so he kind of avoided the idea of bringing Salem's Lot into a bigger city and thought, well, what about a small town, sort of an idyllic little hamlet? And so he became sort of intrigued by that. And then, so he says, this is from a essay for Adeline magazine from back in 1980. He said, I began to turn the idea over in my mind, and it began to coalesce into a possible novel. I thought it would make a good one if I could create a fictional town with enough prosaic reality about it to offset the comic book menace of a bunch of vampires. And he also cites, in Danse Macabre, his nonfiction book of the horror genre, he also references a dream that he had when he was 8 years old. In it, he saw the body of a hanged man dangling from the arm of a scaffold on a hill, and the corpse bore a sign, Robert Burns, but when the wind caused the corpse to turn in the air, Stephen King says, I saw that it was my face, rotted and picked by birds, but obviously mine. And then the corpse opened its eyes and looked at me. I woke up screaming, sure that a dead face would be leaning over me in the dark. 16 years later, I was able to use the dream as one of the central images in my novel, Salem's Lot. He just changed the name of the corpse to Hugh B. Marston, who is a notable figure. And then I guess finally, and this is actually kind of curious considering our current political climate, but this Salem's Lot was actually also born out of his distrust of big government. He was writing this around the time of the Watergate scandal, the early to mid-70s. There was a lot of disillusionment in society with government, and he said that the fear behind Salem's Lot seems to be that the government has invaded everybody. So that he says that he would say Salem's Lot was more related to the invasion of the body snatchers than to Dracula, which is sort of an interesting idea. And I think sort of, in the broader sense, I think the phrase that people use all the time for Salem's Lot is, Dracula meets Peyton Place, which in a way I'd almost still say is a bit reductive, even though that's Stephen King's own words. Because I think that it's the larger portrait of the town he paints is actually, it has a lot of underlying darkness. It's not as idyllic. It's not a pitch perfect sort of ideal of a town. But let's sort of ask the bigger question, kind of based on, some of those origins. But why do you think he was drawn to vampires for his second novel? And where do you think vampires sort of existed in culture?
Well, I think, he was always like a scholar of H.P. Lovecraft and Richard Matheson and a lot of the old school horror writers that, especially even Edgar Allan Poe, which we'll see, especially, I think he even references in The Shining for the most part. But if you look at a lot of Lovecraft's work, especially, there's this idea of like small towns being cursed and evil descending on small towns, and vampires are such a, like I had mentioned earlier, they are such a great vehicle and medium for any writer to put something, themes on, like, because they're very human, it's this idea, that there's you can draw themes of, mortality, immortality, the foreigner presence, which is huge in this book, the fears of xenophobia,
the other,
and immigration, and the other is such a big thing that you can do with vampires, because while they do look like us, they aren't us, and I think that's something that is so why we've never really had a decade that hasn't had vampires involved in it.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of where we were with pop culture and vampires, not that I was alive back in the early 1970s, but if you look back upon the films that were coming out, especially at the time, if you didn't have the Universal monsters with the Bela Lugosi Dracula, the 50s and 60s were dominated by the Hammer version of Dracula, kind of like this gothic, not modern at all vampire with the cape and everything else. And like you said, he was teaching Bram Stoker's Dracula in school, and this has obviously a much more modern feel to it. I don't think that had really been done at all when it really came to popular vampires in pop culture, at least.
Yeah.
At that time.
That's true. I think that his whole idea of bringing vampires into this sleepy town, I think, every town has a secret. Every town has a story. There's always darkness shrouded in every single corner of, the world. And I think that the best way to illustrate that is to take something that everybody maybe believe in the back of their mind, but, no one's going to say it out loud. No one's ever going to say it. There's all these secrets hidden. And I think vampires are kind of, exactly that point. Like there's some evil lurking. Well, we don't want to admit that it's true, that it's there, but it's there, and and it'll slowly take over the town.
Yeah.
It's interesting that, and maybe it's just because our current president is obsessed with drawing on the past, but this book is so prescient of everything that's going on right now, because you look back on even Straker and Barlow. Their characters are foreigners. They're Europeans that have come into this small town. They're starting their own business, and there's a lot of talk in the book from Gillespie to even to Crockett to all these characters that are like, well, if you haven't been here in 20 years, you're still a stranger, and this kind of frowned upon culture that is brewed. When there's a newcomer that comes into town, you're suspicious of them. And so there, I could see why, looking back, when we're going to talk about the film, but I could see why King was upset that Barlow just became a monster in it, because if you look at these books, they are like well-rounded characters. That the two villains, are almost carved out more than the regular townspeople, in the sense that they do have some sort of pathos to them. One of the passages I underlined, which it didn't even occur to me until I was kind of thinking about some of these themes. It's when Barlow is actually confronted Corey right after he's shit his pants and has been kicked out of Bonnie's house. But he says, then Barlow says to Corey, "I am from many lands, but to me this country, this town seems full of foreigners. You see, And later he says, foreigners, yes, but beautiful, enticing foreigners, bursting with vitality, full-blooded, and full of life. Do you know how beautiful the people of your country and your town are, Mr. Bryant?" And he says, "They have never known hunger or want, the people of this country. It has been 2 generations since they knew anything close to it, and even then it was like a voice in a distant room. They think they have known sadness, but their sadness is that of a child who has spilled his ice cream on the grass at a birthday party. There is no, how is the English, attenuation in town. They spill each other's blood with great vigor. Do you believe it? Do you see it?" And then he says, and this is important, "The country is an amazing paradox. In other lands, when a man eats to his fullest day after day, that man becomes fat, sleepy, piggish. But in this land, it seems the more you have, the more aggressive you become. You see, like Mr. Sawyer, with so much, yet he begrudges you a few crumbs from his table." Also, at his birthday party, who will push away even a baby if he can eat no more? Is it not so? That whole dialogue, that whole line, is that more, like, it cannot resonate anymore than today.
Years later.
It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and Stephen King said he used to describe Salem's Lot as his favorite novel that he had written back in the day, and he has for a lot of reasons. It's kind of a two-pronged thing, and I have points kind of about both of them, but regarding your latter point, he said, "In a way, it is my favorite story mostly because of what it says about small towns. They are kind of a dying organism right now. The story seems sort of down home to me. I have a special cold spot in my heart for it." And it makes me think in a way about how Straker is opening sort of an upscale antique shop there. Mm-hmm. And when, my wife and I go to, there's small towns we go to in southern Michigan just to go on weekend trips there, and they seem to be sort of dominated by these huge antique stores. And it's become sort of a way to help turn what were sort of small towns into tourist destinations, because I think the only ways that small towns can really survive in this age is to have kind of a strong tourist, draw to them, and that is usually brought by, quote unquote, foreigners, people from outside. I thought that was something that struck me. But also Stephen King, he believes that out of the books of his that would persevere, he says, Salem's Lot would, because it's such a traditional vampire story. It's a story that, he says there's no bells and whistles. And I find that very interesting, because it seems that if, you're going to tell a vampire story, you have to subvert the mythology somehow. You need to create a new wrinkle in it. You need to, look at Blade or something. They or just, stories like that where they so clearly take sort of the basis of vampire mythology and then turn it on its head or create something new. And that seems to be sort of the prerequisite to telling a vampire story a lot. Whereas what Stephen King did here, I mean, the vampires here exist in the same sort of world, I'd think, as Bram Stoker's Dracula.
I think also with this, with any of his books that are set in a small town, whether it's Castle Rock or Derry or anything like that, it makes it timeless because these small towns that you see today haven't really changed that much. I mean, you've got cell phones, internet, but a lot of these small towns are still very much their normalcy from 40 years ago is normal now. You know.
And honestly, it's funny that you mentioned the technology because even back in the 70s, they were talking about, or not in the 70s, back in this book, they talk about the technology affecting towns. I mean, there's a line where Jimmy Cody is, he's kind of just looking over. I mean, they're kind of just gesticulating, but he basically says, and TV has pretty much put the kibosh on the old neighborhood get-togethers, except for the duffers who hang around Milt's store. All this could be going on with great effectiveness behind the scenes, in which he's talking about how evil can just kind of spread. And then there's also discussion later on about how there's a really weird parallel to electricity that's later on in the book, where I think it's with Callahan, and he says the evil still went on, but now it went on the hard, soulless glare of parking lot fluorescence, of neon tubing, of 100-watt bulbs by the billions. He continues from there, talking about how electricity has surged and changed and coursed its way into society. And to your point about small towns being marginalized and left behind, I think that there is this fear that's inherent in this book that is kind of, again, it's so telling of today's day and age, and especially right now, where the biggest discussion is there are people in this country that feel like they've been left behind, they've been put off to the corner. That you get that from this book. I mean, even like Gillespie, who is he's supposed to be overlooking the town. He mentions himself that the kids today are into violence. The entertainment has changed the kids to the point where he can't even recognize the type of. I mean, he was in the war. Let me find the line. Here it is. Me and Nolly went to a drive-in show up in Falmouth a couple of weeks ago, just before they closed her down for the season. I seen more blood and killings in that first Western than I'd seen the years in Korea. Kids was eating popcorn and cheering them on. There's this running theme that change is happening. There's this fear of change in this book. And I think that the small town is such a good way to present that idea because, obviously a city's progress, that's why it is a city. So, and I think that's an important setting for the story.
And I think that, do you think that what you're kind of saying do you think Stephen King was thinking about those ideas when he had Father Callahan, who'd been, turned into a vampire, sort of, in his weird way? Did you think he had that idea in mind when he got on a bus and went to the city or wherever he, went? Because he just leaves town, and we find out, later in Stephen King that he ends up, in the city. And so I find that sort of an interesting idea based on what you're saying, is that even the people who haven't been turned, they all leave. Yeah. Like even the sheriff,
or the way of the town is changed forever because of how they've been. Look at the Marston house itself. It's this idea that you could see it from all places, of the town. It's almost like this giant corporation that has taken over this town. It's like, that has changed the way. And like, once you've succumb to it, you're never the same again. That those old ways are gone, and that's what. Yeah, I think the city metaphor of Callahan leaving because there is nothing there for him anymore because that way is gone.
And obviously, we'll talk about that in another 10 casts. When we get to the Dark Tower. But I will say
2021.
I do think it's interesting though, and I want to bring up that even though he does flee to the city, it's to basically be forgotten and hide, and so I feel like the city just becomes another small town just on a larger scale. It's easier to disappear. It's easier to be forgotten.
In a small town, everybody knows your name. That's the whole crux. Cheers.
I was gonna say I thought you were going there, but I just wanted to leave it with this. It says these are the town's secrets, and some will later be known, and some will never be known. The town keeps them all with the ultimate poker face. The town cares for devil's work no more than it cares for God's or man's. It knew darkness, and darkness was enough.
Yeah. And I think that can sort of lead us into a discussion about the book's structure.
Look at me. Look at me, teacher.
You know, this isn't a very straightforward... It's a straightforward narrative, but I think the way it jumps around between characters, it's very much an ensemble story, because for Stephen King, unlike Carrie, where he was sort of operating within a very minimal group of characters, he's really wanted to build out the community of Salem's Lot. And so, you know, he sort of perhaps overindulges in trying to create a rich tapestry of characters throughout. And I guess what's interesting about it, and maybe why... I mean, has anyone here seen Peyton Place? Is that a reference that is way before
That
our
is a
time?
movie that was on AMC back when they had movies a lot.
Yeah.
Back in the 80s and 90s.
But
it was on all the time. I never watched it.
The vibe that I get from it, and I could be totally wrong here...
It's based on the book, I should also say. I'm not a total fool.
But that it was like a very idyllic sort of thing. And I guess for me, it's like... what lies beneath here in Salem's Lot, a lot of it is really pitch black, and I guess I'm very drawn to that idea. So so I guess let's talk about sort of how King navigates and maneuvers through these various chapters and these various nooks and crannies of the town.
I just want to look back because his first novel, as we discussed in the last podcast, is Carrie, and this is his second. And Carrie, like you mentioned a little bit, it has a different type of structure to it. We get the perspective from the future. We get the perspective from journals, diaries, interviews with People magazine or whatever that is. And this book is very much just pretty straightforward in terms of A to Z. It's bookended, of course, with the man and the boy, who we later learn are Ben Mears and Mark Petrie.
Oh,
Mark Petrie. Danny Lives.
That would have been a very different...
very different book. And this book also introduces some themes that would become very common to King lore. You've got the lead protagonist who's a writer, which happens several times, and it continues to happen. You've got the friendly old man who kind of acts as the sidekick. Of course, we love to talk about the awkward lovemaking, full-fledged. It's all about here. But the most important thing here is the ensemble. And the world building in that town, and how deep it gets. And my favorite chapters are the lot chapters, which are just kind of these little vignettes about what's going on around town, while everybody else is kind of ignorant. And you know, you learn about like the murders and hidden cash, these little things, these little evil deeds that people are taking part in or falling victim to, and you know, it gives the reader the information, whereas our protagonists still have no idea what's going on, which I loved a lot.
Well, unlike in Carrie, there's very much sort of an an omniscience to King's narrator here. He's not drawing information from journals or novels or whatever like he did in Carrie. The narrator of this book knows everyone's interior, exterior, their secrets, everything. And so there are those moments where, you know, we're not following one particular character's point of view like we do in other parts of the book, but where it's literally like, here is King saying, let me break down, let's take this small group of citizens and let's explore the darkest thing about each one of them. And that's a very striking thing for me.
No, absolutely. And I think that it's really interesting because you said that sometimes he overindulges, and I think he does, because this is the first time that he's able to really build an entire town. But, you know, he does it so well. And like you were saying with the lot chapters, I think it was the chapter 3, the lot, is very, very far into the book. And it almost feels like, you know, you're pulled out of time all of a sudden. He just starts talking about all of these other instances of things that people have done and things that they haven't done or whatever, that have nothing to do necessarily with the vampires. And it's done so well, though. It's amazing that he's able to weave that back into the story at that point.
Yeah.
And just laying it out. I think he talks about. I think I had it written down, but he talks about someone dies of a heart attack, I believe.
Yeah. It was
it was the only natural death for that day. And
yeah.
I just thought that was so, crazily eerie,
And that sort of falls into what we discussed last week about the idea that King loves to forecast the doom that is on the horizon.
Right.
I mean, my favorite thing about this book is just like the scope. I mean, the fact that he is able to I almost see it almost like he's playing like SimCity.
That's true. You go paragraph to paragraph in a lot of
it's unreal, and the depth that each character has. Like even for Ben Mears, who not even for he's the main protagonist, so of course he's going to go deep on there. But he even creates like the he describes the books that Ben has written. Like
Conway's Daughter.
Conway's Daughter or Air Dance. And,
I love it.
He creates these original stories for those books, and it creates such you just feel real. Like it just feels so like this isn't, granted we know this is fiction, but you believe it, and you're in that world with them, and it's so hard to do that as a writer. I feel, because yes, you can over-explain and paint, what roads look like, and how far the city limits go, and where everyone works, and how this tastes and that tastes. But it doesn't really, if you don't actually believe what's happening in there, it doesn't really matter. And I think the way that he goes deep into everyone's, like what you had already suggested before, that he goes into the darkest moments of everyone. I mean, there's that one point where you even like see someone cross-dressing. I just imagine like it was like a shot like Wes Anderson's Life Aquatic in my head, just
slow
like going
crawl
from
across every single all down the street.
Exactly, just going through every different room. And I love that. Like the scope of this is just great, and you're going to see that in like so many of his books after this, and especially this is such a prelude to The Stand. Like. In terms of just being able to set up that map of characters, which is great.
And sometimes I feel like I tend to, unfortunately, check out. My mind's all over the place. So when he's going into these deep illustrations, describing these, the town, city limits, how far it took to get, from one place to the other, and things like that, it doesn't matter, because even if you glazed over these things, it's done so well that later on you start to realize, well, I have a really good sense of where I am or where these characters are at this point, or and it's because he laid the groundwork and he wrote it so well that I feel like it sinks in the back of your mind, so that later on when Mark's running from here to there, you can see it in your head. You know the path through the woods. You know, because he's already described it, even if you were trying not to retain it. Which I think's a credit to his writing, absolutely. And
it's some of the most beautiful writing he's done. I mean, there is one section that I just have to read, because I remember I reread this section at least 5 times when I first read it. It's gorgeous. It sums up why I love the fall season. Like he says, it's on page 200. But when fall comes, kicking summer out on its treacherous ass, as it always does one day sometime after the midpoint of September, it stays a while like an old friend that you have missed. It settles in the way an old friend will settle into your favorite chair and take out his pipe and light it, and then fill the afternoon with stories of places he has been and things he has done since the last he saw you. It stays on through October, and in rare years into November. Day after day, the skies are a clear, hard blue, and the clouds that float across them, always west to east, are calm, white ships with gray keels. The wind begins to blow by the day, and it is never still. It hurries you along as you walk the roads, crunching the leaves that have fallen in mad, variegated drifts. The wind makes you ache in some places that is deeper than your bones. It may be that it touches something old in the human soul, a chord of race memory that says, migrate or die, migrate or die. Even in your house, behind square walls, the wind beats against the wood and the glass and sends its fleshless pucker against the eaves, and sooner or later, you have to put down what you're doing and go out and see. And you can stand on your stoop in your dooryard at mid-afternoon and watch the cloud shadows rush across Griffin's pasture and up Schoolyard Hill, light and dark, like the shutters the gods being open and closed. I mean, there's more to it, but she's like, it's just gorgeous, and like you don't expect that sometimes in these, in
the vampire taking over a small town,
right?
And I think King, to piggyback off of your beautiful writing that Stephen King has there, there's another passage I've got to read. I felt compelled to write this down. This is after Mark escapes from the Marston house. Mm-hmm. I believe it's after he leaves Susan behind, and he goes home. And King writes, "The essential and defining characteristic of childhood is not the effortless merging of dream and reality, but only alienation. There are no words for childhood's dark turns and exaltations. A wise child recognizes it and submits to the necessary consequences. A child who counts the cost is a child no longer." Just this little piece of prose, and then the next chapter I think goes right into the morgue.
Right.
It's just these little pieces he's got here that.
And I love that
he small beauty.
And I love that he can counteract that with moments of kind of pulpy nastiness. You know?
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, that's sort of what I love. And there's, and even though I think that there's times when, maybe he can get a little self-indulgent in moments of cruelty, I think that there is at the same time an economical quality to the way that he sort of can create an arc or a journey for a lot of the minor characters.
Oh, he gets cruel again.
Yeah.
He does the pimples on the ass.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that.
The cows,
pimples on the ass comes back again.
And the cow, the illusion of cows, like people as cows, that was something in Carrie, and it comes back in.
What I love is with some of the minor characters, with several of them, there will be maybe between 3 and 5 vignettes that we get, and in those very small vignettes, we create a very simple portrait and journey of someone's life. It's like, here is them as they exist in Salem's Lot. Here is them as the town begins changing, and here is them either when they change or after they've changed. Yep. And I think one of the best examples, and the one that always stuck with me, was the bus driver, Charlie Rhodes.
Yes.
Which is such a minor part. Mm-hmm. But, and I always remember this too because I think I read this when I was in 7th grade. And in 7th grade, I played a sailor in a play whose name was Charlie Rhodes. Oh. So I was always drawn to that.
Now this is, Rhodes, not Rose, right? Not
R-H-O-D-E-S.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah. And, but...
Like Randy Rhodes.
But it's like, with Charlie Rhodes, we meet him and he's sort of an angry bus driver of children. And we get kind of a good sense of why he's an angry man or a bitter man or an unfulfilled man. And then sort of we get a sense of him, watching the town go to shit and sort of where are the children. And then when he finds the children are all waiting for him on the school bus. And that to me, the image of him climbing aboard the school bus and then being unable to escape as all the children sort of stalk him and kill him is one of the most haunting moments that has stuck with me from childhood. It's written beautifully, and it's one of the more terrifying scenes. And it's also just a really great, 3-act play that we get with this character. That's sort of, it's those small moments that I think really help give a readability and a pulpy sort of weight to the moments of elegance or the moments of introspection that we get throughout the rest of the book.
Well, and he even gets it down to a micro level. I mean, there's little details that just stay with you, and it's like they always say it's the little things that count. But there are parts of this book where you're just like, what? Like that's so weird. Why would you? Like when he sees the box of Junior Mints in the confessional booth, later on down, the thing. It's just so weird. It's just like okay, and then you have the he mentions how he wants to quit smoking offhand, but it's just a little character quirk. You go, oh well, it looks like he was struggling with something a little bit more. It clearly was probably attributed to his wife's death, obviously, but it's just little things that are kind of peppered in there that just make it so great. It's so varied and it's so it just feels organic. That's the best way I could explain it.
Absolutely. And since we've started touching on character a little bit, I think let's move on to who we consider to be our heroes, our zeros, and our villains.
I'm gonna have to kill this fucking clown. Welcome to the Losers Club, asshole!
got, Justin?
I remember as a kid, I really looked up to Ben Mears, and I used to write a lot when I was younger. I guess I still do. But he's obviously the quote-unquote hero of the book, and 20 years later, as I read it as I'm a little older, or a lot older, it's still a good character for me. It's not one of even the top 3 or 4 characters for me of the whole book. I think it's because I cannot help but think that Ben Mears is kind of a stand-in for Stephen King.
Oh, absolutely.
With how, well, you can jump on this too, Mike. We talked about this, but with this how effortless the beautiful, young, virile Susan Norton happens to be reading Air Dance when he shows up into town, and I think maybe 2 days later she's fallen in love with him, which is actually stated in the book, like I've fallen in love with him.
Yeah.
It's a little goofy. You can get to that side, but I do want to say nowadays, and this is obviously because I read The Dark Tower numerous times and the Perry Callahan character. So now looking back, it's the Father Callahan character that really sticks with me.
Yeah.
And how strange it is in terms of how the story's told. We talked about this earlier in the podcast already, but it's got its own little side story. And it's a character that just disappears, and nobody who survives the book has any idea what he's really gone through.
Yeah, I do think it's like the idealized Stephen King.
The Ben Mears.
Especially when he wrote this, he was just like, I want to be in this story, and I want to make a hunk that has made some great stuff. And maybe this is just me and reading way too between the lines with this, but just like I had discussed with Carrie, I do think his insecurities bleed through here. I think he's trying to still bite his thumb at the literary world, because there's a line in early on in the 29th page when he's talking about his books. And he says, they go, Miranda had also loved Conway's daughter, but most of his coffeehouse friends had been non-committal, and most of the critics had clobbered it. Well, that was critics for you. Plot was out, masturbation in.
Hey.
And it's just so you get just reading that again. It goes back to what I was saying. He so is channeling in his insecurities here, which I love. I think that's great, and especially since he was being successful at the time, he was probably just been "Screw you," I did it, and maybe that's just reading too much into it. But I do
I buy it though. I buy that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. I do think, though, and I kind of disagree with both of you in terms of your favorite characters, but obviously it's an opinion.
That's my favorite character.
It's an opinion. But Ben Mears, I feel like he's also very described not as this hunk. He is kind of just this meek, normal guy. I feel they don't really, he's got a successful novel or two, but I don't know. They don't really make him this superhero. I felt when reading it. So I felt like I was going to really connect with him right from the get go.
Yeah.
But I didn't. I didn't connect with Susan. The only character I really started feeling a real connection with, and I think it's because when I was a kid, I was really into monsters and vampires and things like that. So when we got to Mark, even though here's this kid, I'm not connecting with any of these adults yet, really, on the level at which I wanted to. I was really with Mark on this journey of his childhood and his, when Danny comes to get him and he's able to this kid is able to withstand the draw of the vampire, and he knows what's going on. He's very aware, and it's also that line with imagination and adults kind of forgetting and adults not really believing anymore. So it's harder for them to take that stance and have the willpower to fight against that. So I felt like Mark was his really strong character for me.
I think it's called again in It, obviously. That
and then on top,
idea takes place.
Another thing too was funny is because when I read, Father Callahan obviously shows up in the Dark Tower later on, and I read the whole Dark Tower series before reading this, so I was really excited about getting to Callahan's character, and he really is just kind of this no name, is not a very huge character. Obviously, there's some definite, things that happen with him later on in the book, but I was surprised at how small a character this was that King felt, I want to bring him back. And obviously, we'll talk about that later.
To your point about Mark, though, there's an interesting part that it kind of it reminded me a little bit of Scream, actually, in where he is obsessed with movie monsters, and he's building those models and he's painting them. And I wondered, do you think you related? I mean, we love horror movies, and you collected horror movie. I mean, we're sitting next to all the merchandise and stuff too, and I have a ton of it also, and we all do. But was that also like something that when you like when his friend comes over and he's like, oh, what are you playing with these things for? And his father is kind of like oh, he's playing with these monsters, he's painting these monster models again. Like, I wonder if that was like a gateway for you, or you're just like you hit hooked in that, because he's like, it is kind of like this. Oh wow! Look at this fringe kid just like playing with like these horror dolls like up in his like room.
No, and absolutely, I absolutely connected with that, and I think it's funny because what was uncool back then, still playing with these monster toys, at a certain age, it's like the complete reversal now. You see so many people. You have Comic-Con, you have all these. I mean, full-grown adults, buying action figures and doing all these things, and it's almost like the geeks have won.
Big Bang Theory.
Yeah, absolutely.
On CBS this week.
What a geeky show that is.
What a bunch of nerds.
What a bunch of dorks with great fashion. I think for me, as I was reading, I think Stephen King writes Ben and Susan very well. Yeah. But at the same time, there's no teeth there, no pun intended. Ben, and I think that this is a problem that Stephen King hits with a lot of his sort of milquetoast protagonists. He has his heroes, and the heroes tend to be noblemen who have sort of, and this is why kind of one of the reasons The Shining is so wonderful, is because Jack is such a, unreliable character, and he's a scary character. He's a man who has demons that involve child abuse and alcoholism and, perhaps child homicide. There's a lot of scary things in his past, and it helps make his journey into darkness that much more resonant. More on that in 2 weeks. But I think with Ben, he lost his wife, and there's a undercurrent of tragedy there. But at the same time,
it's never explored, right?
Yeah,
it's explored a little bit,
very minor.
Yeah, and at the same time, I don't even know if I needed it to be explored. I guess I just wanted Ben to be a little less cool. Like, he's so cool, he's so charismatic, everyone thinks he's great, and the thing is, he is, because I love reading him. He's a well-written character, and Susan's so beautiful, she's so perfect, and they immediately meet and fall in love, and it's a story that I think works on sort of a surface level, and it's satisfying, and the fact that King kills Susan is, I still think, one of the more powerful moments of the book. It is, it's great that he goes there.
It's jarring.
Yeah, it's very jarring, and I remember as a kid being very surprised, because it felt, it felt very, what's the word I'm looking for? Taboo in a weird way, that to kill that person, because the love story usually really matters.
Did you when you're reading it though, now that we've seen so many adaptations of vampires and the way that the rules are, did you ever feel like when you're reading it, like Susan was going to come back? Because you watch Fright Night and the girlfriend becomes a vampire, then she's fine at the end. But like, did you ever feel like she was going to come back while reading?
When I was a kid, yes.
Yeah, same here.
And then
no, I didn't, only because of the way it goes down. I mean, and having watched or read and been so involved in vampire stories.
I know, me too.
No, I was glad they didn't either.
Yeah,
I think going back to the Ben and Susan issue, it's a fine story. It's not eye-rolly too much.
No, it's not.
But I do want to say, it seems so perfect for so long between the two of them. You're just convinced that they're going to live. They're going to be the survivors of the book.
Right.
And so there's actually a section before she does die, in which the chapter ends with somebody placing their hand on her shoulder. End of chapter, and you think, is she dead here?
Yeah.
And then she's not dead, and you think, okay, well, that's a little funny joke that Stephen King put on the reader. And then she does die about 20, 30 pages later, and it's just it's almost a cruel joke. And then for the fact that there's still about 100 pages left without her absolutely confirmed dead was a nice way to go about the twist, I thought.
And that was another thing, too. I felt it's a very chapter-based book. There's lots of little chapters in there, and we were talking about last time with Carrie that there's always these like endings that allude to something. There's always like a great little line or something, and I forgot to mention this one. Mark's talking. He says, he went downstairs to kiss them goodnight, moving lively and gracefully, sparing one glance backward to the table where his monsters rested in tableau. Dracula, with his mouth open, showing his fangs, was menacing a girl lying on the ground, with the mad doctor was torturing a lady on the rack, and Mr. Hyde was creeping up on an old guy walking home. Understand death? Sure. that was when the monsters got you. And there's a lot of that going on in the book, which is great. And it really drives home these characters too, though. It's like these little snippets, these little one-liners, like tagging onto each character, like who they really are and what they really believe, you know?
Right. And I think that's one of the reasons that Mark is for being a child, and it is sort of the first sign of how well Stephen King can write children. And I think he does stand out. But in terms of my favorite character, it's almost hard for me to choose from the main characters as much as I enjoy a lot of them. I think one of the things about King's work is I find myself being drawn to smaller characters like Dud Rogers, the junk man who is, got a hunchback and a crush on a teenage girl, and it's despicable and gross, but
it brings one of King's most lewd writings.
Yeah, it's gross, but at the same time, it's a character that feels so well drawn and so vivid in such a short bit of writing. And I'd say the same for Charlie Rhodes, and I'd say the same for the sheriff as well. I think those characters are well written, and then but in terms of the main characters, I also, reading it with Father, I read this when I was a kid before The Dark Tower, so I remember finding the Callahan story to be anticlimactic, and I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that when I was that age, I couldn't process a lot of his spiritual and struggles that he was having with faith, and because they are nuanced and they're very, very smart and well drawn, but just the idea of him being an alcoholic preacher whose faith is there but also struggling against the evolutions in society, and him almost feeling out of place in modern society, those things on a reread, even if he didn't show up in Dark Tower, I think just being older, I relate to that character a lot more, and he resonates a lot more.
Yeah, as an adult, I like the open-endedness, like you said, of where he is.
Yeah,
and
me
it
too.
also goes a lot to the fact that it's 2016, and even in the Salem's Lot universe, that town is still out there, and there are still vampires roaming around.
Yeah.
And so I love that little bit there.
Well, one of the things I'm gathering with is something that I had been kind of inferring while just doing research and writing notes for this podcast, is that it's interesting that, King lays out the blueprint for the town, the characters, and all the conflict that would happen in between, but what really ends up happening with everything in the end is that he's basically creating these sort of bold terms or towers, so to speak, without no pun intended, of just themes and feelings and emotions that he's going to install in this book using different characters. With Callahan, you have that obviously there's those themes of faith that gets in there. But you even have by the end, you have somebody like Jimmy Cody, who's that's my favorite character in the book. But he's a man of science that comes around to fiction, basically, to vampires, and it was so reassuring to have a man of science that gives some sort of weight to this story, because you're, oh wow, a doctor in this small town is going to actually believe what is happening. That is radical, in my opinion, because you would never have that. And then you also have the sheriff, who instead of being, should be the hero of the day, it's like watching. He ends up like serving as just the theme of hopelessness. He adds the sense of hopelessness, like the dialogue where he gives him the gun at the end. He gives him his blaster, and it's like that would be like watching Hell or High Water and Jeff Daniels, Jeff Bridges, giving up 25 minutes in the movie. Like it's interesting how he
Well, it's an example, where as you said, Cody comes around, but adapts to it and tries to save the day. I mean, everybody in the book comes around to accept the fact that there's vampires. It just depends on how they handle it. And then Parker's bails. He leaves town with his family.
But Cody comes in so fast. It doesn't even have to convince him so much, which is interesting because I usually gravitate towards the older characters in all of Stephen King's books. I just love his older role, the old man role. Whereas where I thought Matt kind of got like I feel like Matt got kind of he kind of sells Matt short in this book. I feel I feel like you kind of have a great character, and then to have this like sort of heart attack thing, I feel like they already had Jimmy Cody at that point, so they're like, oh, we got to do something with him.
Matt is where I struggle as well, because the character, I think, became kind of a cartoon as it went on. He's a character who I felt was very well rendered early on, and I was very drawn to him. In the scene, I believe, when he has one of the movers, wasn't it? The guy who stays with him, who turns into a vampire. Yeah. The whole sequence of like him hearing the noises from the other room and the talking and everything from the other room is very eerie. And in that whole section, and sort of when we're getting to know Matt, you know, he's a very empathetic character and a very funny character and a very sort of, you know, the kind of warm. He exudes such a warmth that I feel like is, you know, part of the idyllic aspect of Salem's Lot, and he's so smart. But then once he sort of becomes Van Helsing when he's in the hospital bed and he's reading all the books and he's kind of dispensing vampire lore, and like Stephen King uses all these exaggerated exclamation points whenever he speaks, and it becomes very over the top, and I think that they really could have cut back on a lot of that because it almost feels like Stephen King was trying to approximate Bram Stoker in a weird way, and he veers into melodrama in the latter moments with Matt's character in ways that I feel are very out of place in the book, and you know, all those moments of having to convince people that we're dealing with vampires. I don't know. I mean, there's other ways I think to approach that without veering so far into you know, the hyperbolic nature of sort of what Matt becomes in the hospital bed.
This kind of dates back to what we were talking about, what I was talking about with Carrie from last week, was the reliance on talking about telekinesis and breaking down the history of telekinesis and what telekinesis means and this and that. And he does the same thing here, like you said, with the vampire lore. And I don't know if it's because, again, maybe back in 1975, the only thing people really knew about vampires were what they saw in Universal movies or Hammer horror films. But nowadays, now that we know so much, especially thanks to Twilight, by the way, that it just seems to become. It just seems like we could, like you said, just cut so much of that out, and instead of Matt just being this interesting, longtime, you know, member of the town who's a teacher at the elementary school, and for him to just become this cardboard cutout of Van Helsing, it is a little disappointing.
He's like Barbara Gordon, and it basically becomes Barbara Gordon in like Batman, just like the Oracle, just to dispense knowledge and, you know, report back to.
And I didn't like that either. I felt like as soon as there were a few people starting to believe, it to me it started to become like every vampire story. You know, now we've got to go find the nest, we've got to get the master, we have to, you know, it really kind of devolves into that a little bit. Which I think is why I like the Father Callahan aside so much, because that's it was this thing that really wasn't normal for a vampire story, and we get to have that played out a little bit.
I agree with that a lot. I think that I like the idea of this like motley crew coming together of you know, Ben and Jimmy Cody and Father Callahan and Mark and who's the other? Isn't there another person in their little crew?
That's the main. Well, Susan, Jimmy, Matt, Mark, and Ben. That's like the main five.
And that. Well, I mean, I guess by the time they kind of come together, Susan's kind of already been taken.
Well, even when Susan's kind of joining in, there's actually a part in the book where Susan says, "Well, aren't we a merry little crew? This crew of believers." Like King's kind of like saying, "Aren't they great?"
I know. I think I wrote my
aren't these heroes great?
Well, he kind of like, you know, plays around with Susan with this idea of like, you know, there's that word again, can't, like, you know, this like, and it kind of almost parallels like Callahan's faith. You know, the whole themes of faith with him, and where, you know, Ben's just like, you know, why do you always, you know, why are you believing, you know, why can't you just believe, like, why can't you just accept that these things are happening? And then he beats her. Wait. That doesn't happen. But no,
the McDougalls.
No. Ben's a good guy. But it's interesting that like there's so many characters, so like he does have to like kind of toss around like a hot potato of different topics and things that you can get into. So. I do think at some point, whether it's Matt or Susan, King was probably like, I got to do something with these characters. I got to get rid of them somehow. And I think the Matt was the most transparent one because he's literally having a revelation, and he like has a heart attack, and you're just like, oh, okay, well, there you go. Bye,
Matt.
Bye, Matt.
Speaking of heart attacks and why he has that heart attack, moving on to the villains.
Yeah.
I felt like now you have Straker and you have Barlow, who are obviously these like terrifying human beings. But I found myself, I found myself so terrified of Randy's mother. And again, I mean, this woman who's beating this baby.
Yeah.
I felt more jarred by that than anything that was going on with Barlow and Stryker, which is really funny. And once again, I don't know, I have a thing with mothers. We got Carrie's mother, and now we've got Randy's mother.
Well, Susan's mother, too. Is
overbearing.
There's a lot of darkness there, yeah.
I'm a huge fan of Pure One Imports, so I actually thought the Straker and Barlow would have been like really charming.
But yeah, I think along those lines, I think that's why, for me, as much as I do like the main characters, my favorite parts of the book are, I think a lot of them are in the first half. And also, because I really love getting to know the town and finding out the secrets of the town. And I think that's where I found myself connected to a lot of characters. Although there's little moments that, like, and I think speaking also of sort of the minor relationships, I'm also really drawn to Eva, the woman who runs the boarding house. Yeah. And then Weasel, who is kind of the old drunk, and that sort of long forgotten but still simmering romance that's there that's kind of indefinable. And when Weasel becomes a vampire and the things he says to her, I love how all the context of their old relationship feeds into that, and that idea of them kind of giving in to kind of youthful temptation, but it's now happening within the guise of vampire and vampire conversion and all that. And I think that to me is almost where I felt like kind of what you were saying about how you were scared of the mother of that baby. Like I found a lot of fear and a lot of unsettled character work happening in the fringes there.
It's because he's so good at creating short stories. This is a guy that can come up with so many ideas that he doesn't even have room to really put them in places and write them anymore. Like he just consistently churns out. That's why he will do like a random thing online where it's a free, short story series that he's going to run for like a week or so. It's just like, I think that's a really good you get an indication of that with this book because there's just so much going on in such little gasps of scenery. In that one you're talking the lot stuff is great, but there's like 40 different stories in each one of those, and that's it's so telling that this is a guy, and like I said the last episode, it's all coming from one mind. All of these ideas, all these conflicts, all these stories, all these emotions, like they're all just coming from one mind, and it's just wild to think how he's able to continuously churn out. And granted, we see a lot of similarities, and you had mentioned like there's like always a writer protagonist, but like to Randall's point, like those little points in this story is just so telling of like the creativity that this guy has.
And I think kind of before we move on from character, I'd really love if we could all just touch on Barlow himself, since we haven't really touched on him. How do we feel about how King paints, what is a vampire in this world? Is it what we see in Toby Hooper's Salem's Lot, where it's sort of this creature? Or is it what we see in Rob Lowe's Salem's Lot, which is Rutger Hauer? Or is it somewhere in between? Like, how did we envision this vampire on the page?
I think he's much more cool and collected and calm. Mm-hmm. And I think the Hauer character, just the fact that he's got dialogue, separates him or makes him closer, I guess, to the novel iteration. But in terms of the Straker and Barlow relationship, I was much more interested in the Straker storyline. Yeah. I think once Barlow... I like Barlow when he would pop up throughout. Like when he pops up with the kid having the affair. Right. And these little moments... Those are really interesting. But then again, it kind of devolves, I should say, into what Matt Burke devolves into in Van Helsing. Now he kind of just becomes, it's just another Dracula. At that point, I feel like I don't want to sound like I don't like this novel, by the way, because I'm just saying. But we be critical, absolutely. But I just want to say, the scariest thing for me about the book was the fact that this town that had been, every small town's got its dark underbelly.
Well, this one has.
Well, this one's got its dark underbelly.
Evil-
But what I'm saying
evil
is,
running
in terms
through
of everything, just your small town normalcy slowly getting away from you.
It's the
and I
effects.
love that.
It's the ripple effect.
And I
The ripple
love.
effect.
I'm always a sucker for the things that go bump in the night, and then during the day everything seems fine. But then once the sun goes down, it all goes to hell.
But
I love
even
that.
during the day, things aren't great, and that's what's I thought was kind of scary in this too. Is that you can see how things as the novel progresses, even the daytime, the town just starts dying.
Well, because of what's happening at night.
Exactly. Yeah. But even like seeing that ghost town and the after effects of it, that's what really haunted me. Was that for them, the effects of what they were doing was more terrifying to me than the actual presence of them. Because when they actually confront him and like Susan's bludgeoning him and or Mark's bludgeoning Straker and whatnot.
That's just the end of the book
It's
at
scary.
that point.
Exactly.
And now we're done.
Exactly.
I felt like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great. I think that actually leads us pretty well into our next segment, which we like to call the cemetery.
What's the bottom of the truth?
Well, sometimes that is better. The person you put up there ain't the person that comes back. It may look like that person, but it ain't that person. Because whatever lives in the ground beyond that cemetery ain't human at all.
This is a section where we like to just talk about, I think, the scariest moments, the most notable deaths, just the things that kind of really stuck with us.
There's this idea in the book that something's always happening behind the scenes, in the shadows, however you want to say it. And I think like the best scene that describes that is when Mark Ryerson.
No, it's Mike.
It's Mike Ryerson is burying Danny Glick in the cemetery, and he's all alone. And then the sun just keeps kind of going down and down, and the way King keeps going back to how the sun looks, and then going back to how long he's getting, he's been burying, digging this grave, and how tired he is, and how he kind of feels as if something's there, and that there's this danger that's there, and we know something's going to happen. And it's just, it is a classic horror movie scene, but it's not as explicit as a lot of the other scenes could be. Like that scene, just like the whole time I was just like, oh my god, like leave, just leave the graveyard, like.
And he can't. He's compelled to stay, and I think that's definitely one of my most creepiest moments of the novel is when he's just trying to see if his eyes are still open.
Yeah.
And it's just, he can't stop digging up this grave. And which leads me to another scary moment with Ryerson. Two of my favorites is when Matt hears Ryerson upstairs.
That's also my favorite scene, so you go ahead and take that.
Well, I'll just say it was creepy. He hears someone in the room with him, and the way that it's done, it's just you're in your own apartment reading it alone at night, and you can hear noises down the hall, and you can just picture this thing so well, and it's so absolutely, and no, I love that. What would you think was great about it?
I just love the fact. I mean, a lot of this novel has the vampirism takeover happening off page, where we don't necessarily see people getting bitten. We'll see them the next day saying, oh, I feel really tired, or I feel like I dreamed that somebody visited me last night. And so in this case, just imagining, King paints it so well. I've got the passage here of Matt downstairs, and he hears Mike opening up a window and saying, yes, come in. And then the chapter, as well as part one, ends with the, he could not have risen even if the brass knob on his own door had begun to turn. He was paralyzed with fear and wished crazily that he had never gone out to Dell's that night. I am afraid. And in the awful, heavy silence of the house, as he sat impotently on his own bed with his face in his hands, he heard the high, sweet, evil laugh of a child, and then the sucking sounds, which, by the way, is the description on the back of the book. And it's just end of part one.
Yeah,
and
that's really freaky.
It still freaks me out just reading it now.
The one, I just mentioned like the more explicit scenes, and it's kind of a mix of it. But when the two, it was Hank and Royal, are dropping off the box at the Marston house in the cellar, that scene, and it's not even just you know that it's going to be scary because they build that up as they're driving up the hill towards the Marston house. It's right at the end when Hank is walking out, and King is great at this. Yeah, something snapped behind him. He panicked, threw the keys wildly on the table, and turned away, shambling into a run. As he passed the box, he saw what had made the noise. One of the aluminum bands had let go, and now pointed jaggedly toward the low roof, like a finger. And then later on, when he gets in the car, Royal's like, "Oh, what was down there? Well, what'd you see?" "Nothing," Hank Peter said, and the word came out in sections divided by his clicking teeth. "I didn't see nothing, and I never want to see it again." And like, it's hard to create that sort of tension that you are so easily able to get in movies and on screen, and that scene is just the whole time I was like flipping, just like get the, again, like the cemetery thing. I was like, just get these characters out of here and
please
just get them out.
The scene that hits me every time I read it is when the deputy goes out to the Marston house after Susan disappears.
I'm not joking. I have two of my favorite scenes. Mac had the one, and then the second passage is this very scene you're about to mention.
Well, we had talked
I love
about
it
a week ago too.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Go ahead, but
just
please, it's great.
and you if you have it,
Yeah,
read it,
you go ahead
please.
first, though, please.
But yeah, basically, it's just it's the first time we see Susan as a vampire, and I think that's the moment it's wholly confirmed that she has been turned into one, and just the way King describes her and Barlow coming down the road from the Marston house towards the cop car, and the way that he notes that they're leaving no footprints, and the way that they just seem to be floating towards them. And I think he describes Susan as wearing like a beautiful dress and stuff like that, like she looks really sort of ephemeral and doll-like. That scene, it's not a scene up until now. I've read this book multiple times, but I vividly remembered the moment I read it, that both the first time I read it, the second time, and I probably even read it another time before this, that scene always got under my skin.
Yeah, I do have the passage here. It's just a paragraph, so please bear with me. It's he discovers the car. He discovers Susan's car, and then he hears somebody say, "Sheriff," a light, carefree voice like tinkling bells. Why did his hand drop to the butt of his gun? He turned and saw the Norton girl, looking incredibly beautiful, walking toward him hand in hand with a stranger, a young man with black hair unfashionably combed straight back from his forehead. That's Dracula, pretty much, right, guys?
Yeah.
McCaslin shone the flashlight at his face and had the oddest impression that the light was shining right through it without illuminating it in the slightest.
Yeah.
And although they were walking, they left no tracks in the soft dirt. He felt fear and warning kindle in his nerves. His hand tightened on his revolver and then loosened. He clicked off his flashlight and waited passively. So now they're in the total darkness, "Sheriff," she said, and now her voice was low, caressing. "How good of you to come," the stranger said. They fell on him.
It's
the
perfect.
finale is just so good.
Perfect.
It's half a page.
I know, and it's like even just the like I didn't even like in my mind, like he just says she looks beautiful, but in my mind that I created this sort of like antique vintage
White
dress, like it's so
flowing hair.
Yeah, it's so simple, the writing, but it's so evocative, but of course, like when you read Dracula lines, I can't help but think of him being like,
I don't drink wine.
It's so good of you to come.
Especially if James Dean's playing.
Oh, no.
I think that's so funny because I feel like there's something that happens in a lot of vampire stories where, a guy turns into a vampire, guy's a vampire. Girl turns into a vampire, her hair's done up, she's in another
beautiful.
dress, she's gorgeous, she's more sexy, she's, I'm like, why can't guys turn into Dracula? Why aren't guys just like these like hunks, after they turn into vampires?
Well, I think that's too true to a degree. Did you guys ever know those Christopher Pike vampire books with the woman?
Fear Street type things? Or?
Yeah, there was a whole series of vampire books that it was all about this one woman. I can't remember what they're called, but I remember then there was this nerdy guy who like was her like human companion, and then she turns him into a vampire at one point, and then he just starts like fucking like crazy. Like it's like when you became a vampire, you're
ready to go.
You're the ultimate hunk. But no.
Bruce.
But I think, and then I mentioned earlier the Charlie Rhodes school bus moment, and that's always stuck with me. Just the image of all these children, these pale, possessed children with, empty eyes, just, sitting in the school bus seats like they were ready to go, and him just climbing on there and them descending on him. That is such a horrifying image to me, and I hate, like, creepy kids, like, in horror, but that is one where I think it's
But when it's done well, because that's the example of innocence becoming pure evil,
Yeah, exactly.
which is always which can be fascinating.
Yeah.
And again, if there is any sort of example that you would want to give of how King is able to forecast what was going to happen to a very natural degree without being too ostentatious about it, I would say this book is perfect at that. Specifically with the way that he continuously talks about where the sun is. You know, because the sun becomes the only resource that you could really depend on in the entire town, over obviously the law enforcement, over even the medical units. It's simple. Like, did everybody in the hospital they're like probably like the last survivors at this point, right? Because like, you know, Matt's there, the whole town's pretty much there. Their nurses are clearly working still. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But the way that he's always like, you know, he ends chapter saying like it was 5:30, or you know, like the sun was cresting over the trees. Like that to me was very eerie, you know, because I'm you know, OCD, and I suffer from acute anxiety disorder. So that stuff was just like you know, you just hear the ticking clock. It's like that 60 minutes.
Well, it's the ancient story of the sun is up and God is with us, and the sun is gone. Yeah, we're alone. I mean, that's, you know, that's what it really boils down to.
There's so much stuff that's pretty freaky in this.
Honestly, read any of the Lot chapters, and you'll find plenty of the most terrifying moments.
Well, there's a lot of crossover stuff too, like where I would almost put it in Pound Cake, and I'll just keep it in Pound Cake. But there's like one dark part of that.
As a matter of fact,
I think that's. I think we're all about to feast on some pound cake because we have arrived.
Oh boy.
After all you've been taught, everyone in bad, Mama, everything in the sin. Come to your closet and pray, ask to be forgiven. He's a nice boy, Mom. You like him. You really like him, Mama.
Oh boy. We got a lot. We got a lot.
Oh, I should explain.
So if you didn't hear Carrie, you're wondering.
If you didn't listen to Carrie, Pound Cake is our section where we like to talk about some of Stephen King's less savory descriptions of sex or bodily functions, some of his bluer aspects, let's say. Pound Cake is a phrase we took from 11/22/63, where he uses it quite often to describe sex. And it's something that we personally find kind of funny, and it's just sort of a way to have a little bit of fun. So here's one that we love to talk about, and this one involves, it's our man Crockett, the real estate agent. And just a detail Stephen King felt it was fun to add in. Larry was alone in his office when Straker came in. His part-time secretary, a Falmouth girl with the most delectable set of jahoobies you ever clapped an eye to.
Jahoobies.
And it's not just jahoobies, but you ever clapped an eye to?
Clapped?
It's like, what are you
What? Okay, can I give a little shout out to our other Losers Club member, Dan Caffrey, who could not be here. And he said the one thing he wanted us to mention was during the Pound Cake segment when King writes, that phone company kid dipping his wick in Bonnie Sawyer's barrel.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Just, God. So Dan, I hope you're happy we mentioned that for you.
Well, we had talked about Dud and how he loves the one younger woman,
Ruthie Crockett.
Crockett. But here's how King describes it. He hunkered down, Dud, looked at it, and found himself thinking of Ruthie Crockett, who wore no bra. When she wore one of those clingy cardigan sweaters, you could see her little nipples just as clear, made erect by the friction as they rubbed against the wool. And if a man could get a hold of those tits and rub them just a little, mind you, a slut like that would go off like a rocket.
Oh, jeez.
Or no, go off just like a rocket.
Steven.
That's just like,
Stevie.
And I get that. I'll say this. I get that he's writing from the perspective of these characters.
Yes.
Like, that is how Dud thinks of women.
Right.
Crockett's the kind of guy who would call boobs jahoobies. It's still just a little bit much. Like, you didn't need to go that far.
Well, even like in the simple things where like on, he's describing, it's another Lot chapter. He's like, but most of all, the town has you because you know it the way you know the shape of your wife's breast. Like
what?
Maybe like I know the way my wife's face is, but not to be a late night over here. But it's just like I've never heard that saying before, like or anything. So it is like goes to your point. It's just like it's a little too far. Some of the exchanges that Bonnie and Corey have together with the whole like Mr. Answering, the Mr. Telephone Man, I think with which is great. also. There's just a lot of the Mr. Telephone Man is great, where you know that King is just having a blast at the keyboard, or not the keyboard, the typewriter.
A blast on the keyboard.
A blast on. Oh, yeah, here we go.
Oh God.
Sorry about going blue. Sorry.
Take that thing off, he said, gesturing. You can take it off, she said. You can figure out the knots, Mr. Telephone Man. And it's like she put one high-heeled foot on each shoulder. He bent to kiss the inside of her thigh, the flesh firm and slightly warm under his lips. It's just like, I mean, it's fine because it's describing here's the thing. When I was in creative writing class, which is, listeners out there, if you really want to make a lot of money, go into creative writing. It's so great.
Journalism also, please.
Just ask Stephen King.
Yeah, just ask. Well, yeah. The exception to the rule. We had a guest writer come into class, and I remember him. He was talking about how to write about sex. And he's like, you never mention never mention like penis or vagina or cock or pussy and stuff like that. You got to think of different ways to go around it. And I've thought about that a lot while reading while rereading Stephen King. I think he does a pretty good job at avoiding that sometimes, but it's so bizarre the way he does it. It's almost like it's like taking six different detours around those words and you're like on like the weirdest ways to do it, where you're just like, how did you come up with these names like Jehoobies? Like that is such a bizarre word. I think it must be only to this that I've ever confined to Stephen King's work where I've ever heard the word Jehoobies.
Honestly, I think about it because we've all read so many of his books, and I think it's also gotten to the point now, no matter how he talks about sex, I'm always going to laugh.
Yeah.
Because either it goes really prude with it, and you're like making like we made together or something like that. Like kind of sounds sweet, but like antiquated. Or he'll just flat out say they fucked they fucked till the dawn or something like that, and you're laughing there too. It's something you can't avoid now. You're gonna laugh.
She orgasmed 8 times.
Yeah, like she climaxed end of part 1 or something. Like
yeah,
I don't know. He's doing.
It always reminds me of this joke from the BBC comedy series Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, where this pretentious author is talking about how nobody knows how to write good sex scenes anymore, and I almost feel like he's poking fun at Stephen King. But he's like, where's the poetry? Where's lines like, he glided into her liquid smooth?
Oh,
perfect.
I will say, to go back to what I was discussing with in the cemetery section, there is some stuff where he does get, he gets into the sexual stuff and it gets really fucking dark. Like, towards the end, I mean, this is like on 522. This is the 4th lot chapter. Describes, Reggie and Bonnie, now that Corey's out of the picture, thanks to one ruined shorts and shotgun.
And the vampire.
Later. And a vampire. And it's actually before, I believe, Corey comes in and beats the shit out of Reggie. But they're basically eating rib roast. Let me just read this whole entire section. This is probably one of the more disturbing parts of the book. Reggie and Bonnie Sawyer are having a rib roast of beef, frozen corn, French fried potatoes, and for dessert, a chocolate bread pudding with hard sauce. These are all Reggie's favorites. Bonnie, her bruises just beginning to fade, serves silently with downcast eyes. Reggie eats with steady, serious attention, killing 3 cans of Bud with the meal. Bonnie eats standing up. She is still too sore to sit down. She hasn't had much of an appetite, but she eats anyway, so Reggie won't notice and say something. After he beat her up on that night, he flushed all her pills down the toilet and raped her, and has raped her every night since.
Jesus. Yeah.
I mean, that's creepy. Like darker than anything else that really happens in the book.
A couple other things that stand out also, though, are whenever the children come back to their mothers and they go right to suckle on their breast. That's obviously highly disturbing.
Yeah.
From whether it's a baby or it's Danny later on.
Yeah.
With Marjorie Glick. It's just terrifying.
So now we're going to move on to how Salem's Lot fits into the larger universe of King.
There's another world out there.
I know there is.
As we all know, he likes to reuse characters and have them pop up in different books and short stories, but also weave them into his Dark Tower series, which is sort of the unifying element of all of Stephen King. And Salem's Lot is actually a very, very important part of the larger Stephen King universe, notably because Father Callahan, Stephen King talked about how he wanted to write a sequel, and I think when he had Father Callahan leave Salem's Lot, he was probably considering him already for the sequel. But then he ended up not writing the sequel because Callahan ended up turning up in the Dark Tower series, where his character ends up being the one who sort of is the one who brings Stephen King into the larger Dark Tower series. So he ends up being a very important character in that regard. But where else does he pop up? Not just Callahan, but how else does Salem's Lot fit into the larger?
Well, I mean, just going back to the whole idea of Callahan in the Dark Tower novels, there's a part in The Wolves of the Calla where they literally pull out a copy of Salem's Lot. And that's when it really is, now we've, like you said, we've really got Stephen King involved. And it's actually Salem's Lot that does it. We can talk about the short stories in a little bit too, I think. But there's actually a part where Mark says he thrusts his fist against the post, which is something that Bill Denbrough brings back in it years in a totally different context.
Yeah,
and just little things like that. When you go back and reread his earlier novels, it's funny to see where they might appear later on. Yeah. I just wanted to point that out. I thought that was a little.
No, that's neat.
Yeah, I couldn't remember if that also pops up in the Dark Tower. It's probably just it though, right?
Well, when we get to the Dark Tower and we reread it,
that's true. I for some reason, because I remember,
I don't think that particular rhyme is in there.
No, because I remember because I read it. Again,
you read it
like last year. The book.
Yeah, okay.
And I remember thinking like, God, that seems so like familiar, and I couldn't remember. And they make it obvious in the book that this is clearly something that has been said before. That is one of the more glaring
tie-ins
that pops up. But I just could not remember if it was in the Dark Tower or not. So
And there's two different short stories that are connected to Salem's Lot. One of them he wrote before the novel when he was in college. I believe the story. I think it was the story Jerusalem's Lot.
Jerusalem's Lot.
Yeah, and who's read that recently?
Well, that's in Night Shift.
We'll be discussing.
So
Night Shift
just briefly, if you want to talk about Jerusalem's Lot briefly and how that ties in, and then there's Jerusalem's Lot, and there's one from the road. One for the road.
Well, it's interesting that both of these short stories, and I'm not going to go into the details of what they entail for the most part because I wanted to stay that to the short story, but they really do build an entire timeline of this town from the beginning to where it is to even after they burn the town down. You know, after Ben and Mark come back to sever everything afire, and so it's interesting to be able to take all of those, the short stories in addition to Salem's Lot and create this own micro universe within the Stephen King universe. And that's what's kind of interesting. I don't know if I have to look back, but I can't think of that many other Stephen King books that have that sort of like these components in terms of short stories. Right?
Little Sisters of Illyria is another Dark Tower story.
I mean, there's
in terms of short stories,
but outside of the Dark Tower. I mean, but I'm talking about like other standalone stories that have like other, like a book, like a singular book, having the short stories around it to kind of create more mythos.
The one I think of is Night Surf from.
I was gonna say I just read that
from Night Shift.
We'll talk about that obviously in Night Shift.
Yeah, and I think that, but I think that was more of a happy accident in a way. I think probably the seeds of the Stand came from Night Surf. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Night Surf is.
That's an earlier short story he wrote, and Night Shift came out the same year as the Stand, but earlier. So that's a little different.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. And there's a lot of lore from that comes right out of Salem's Lot, including all the deleted material that was repurposed for a deleted pages section in the 2004 illustrated edition, and you can tell that King really loves this story and spent a lot of time here, whether it was when he was writing it before or clearly it stuck with him enough to work with Callahan. And I think a lot of it's because of what your initial thoughts, Randall, about this story of Callahan not being done, because it really isn't done.
No.
It's not finished. So I don't know if it's just Callahan that haunted him, or maybe it's that story of, it's interesting. I don't want to go off too much on a tangent on this, but I do think that there's something to be said about how the conceptualizing of King, or the conceptualization of Salem's Lot from King, and how he heard it from, some story or some town that he had passed, and what he had, his friend had said. I think those stories stick with us forever.
Yeah.
And maybe that was actually the seed that planted in Stephen King's head that maybe had him become so influenced to broaden his view as a writer.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe that's why, because there's so much of Salem's Lot, from the way he builds this world, to the way that he builds his characters, to the way that it has its far-reaching the consequences from the actual primary villains, that is so established in this story that also affects the way that his other stories work. Like, The Stand is very much of the DNA from this book. So I think it's interesting when you see all these things together, like from the short stories, and you see the actual book of Salem's Lot. It really is kind of like the blueprint of what Stephen King is going to be. Like, from how we see him today. And I think a lot of it is, I didn't know about that thing about him knowing about the town. What was the town?
Jeremiah's Lot.
Jeremiah's Lot.
Right.
And the fact that actually did happen in real life with him, maybe that really was like a big, I do think that was a huge seed in his head then, for what started all this.
And I was going to ask, where did Carrie take place?
It's another fictional town that's never
Cumberland County,
again.
I think it is.
Yeah.
But they mentioned Cumberland in here, and they also...
Cumberland's the closest town to it, though, I think. I don't think
Carrie. Is that what it was?
But this takes place in Maine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And which a lot of stories will end up taking place in Maine, so that was also kind of another first, I think.
First Maine story.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. Any other ways that, can we remember how vampires manifest in Song of Susanna in the Dark Tower series?
Well, there's different types of vampires.
Okay.
There's the type A vampire and the
energy.
type B vampire, which is another.
And that's interesting to me
evolution.
because it's sort of it's interesting to me because here he was so big on adhering to the traditional idea of vampires, but it seems by the time he started writing the Dark Tower, it's like can't do that anymore.
No, here we
it's
go.
like this isn't Bela
different levels
Lugosi.
of exactly.
Yeah, we got to start introducing what is my new spin on the vampire series, and vampires aside from Dark Tower, they weren't really anything that King played with again, was it?
I feel like we're gonna kick ourselves. I'm really trying to think right now.
Yeah.
Is there something we're missing?
To go back, Chamberlain is the name of the
Chamberlain.
In Carrie, but it's mentioned a couple of times.
But is it in Maine, or is it just, do they say what state it's
he
in?
says it's close to Lewiston, Maine. So it is in Maine, but and Lewiston's referenced in Dark Tower 7 and King.
I'm sorry. The movie Carrie takes place in North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Right? That's what it was. The book is in Maine. That's right.
Don't worry, Mom. I know all about cannibalism. I saw it on TV.
See? It's okay. You saw it on the television.
Okay, now we're going to move on to some of the adaptations of Salem's Lot, including Tobe Hooper's 1979 TV movie, adapting the book. Also, the 2004 TNT Rob Lowe starring remake, or I guess it's a remake, but adaptation, whatever you want to call it. And then also the standalone Return to Salem's Lot film that came out in 1987. And then we're also going to touch on a BBC radio drama about Salem's Lot. So let's start with Hooper's version, which I think, has become sort of iconic, at least in horror circles. I very much remember seeing the VHS cover walking around the video store when I was a kid of Barlow looking very Nosferatu-like, hovering above the Marston house. But I think that it suffered a bit from being a TV movie. Salem's Lot is a very violent book. It's a very bloody book, and I think especially in vampire stories, blood is sort of an important thing. And the movie, I think, being on TV in 1979, while it was revolutionary in some ways, it I think still didn't capture sort of the visceral horror of the book. What do you guys think?
I would agree to a point. I do think, in terms of this, I think there's a lot of scares there without the violence.
Sure.
Particularly with the change to the Barlow character.
Yeah.
Who very much as a speaking role is very much presented as a Dracula-esque character in the 75, 74 novel?
75 novel.
75 novel, thank you very much. And here he's presented as a blue-faced, essentially another version of F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu.
Yeah.
And he's only in, I want to say, 3 scenes where we see his actual face.
Uh-huh.
And they're highly effective every time. It's a remarkable example of a change from the source material that actually works better in this case.
And it seems like there was like some table setting for that, if you think about it, because if the structure of how Barlow is in the book, it's almost like they're prompting something big to happen. You don't really see him; he's always behind the shadows or behind the scenes, and he's in the shadows, and so you have Straker as this sort of like front for him this entire time, and they keep hinting that there's Mr. Barlow. I haven't seen him. Where is Mr. Barlow? So when he does actually come, and he's kind of just the same thing as Straker, it's almost like a disappointment. It's not a disappointment so much because they're still effective, but it's almost like, well, it's just a little more of the same, So I think like maybe Hooper might have seen that and said like, well, no, maybe we should do something. There should be some sort of event to Barlow, and
he's he's almost treated as he's like just this virus that's been brought to the town.
Yeah,
we don't know what his motivations are. We just know that he is this vampiric being, and he's going to spread his will and his force. Yeah.
What I like about Barlow here is that he doesn't talk. I think that it's effective when we see Straker speaking. He has such a pronounced cadence. He has such a pronounced attitude. He's very businesslike. He's very cutting. And then in the book we also hear Barlow talk, or whatever the way he communicates is, and there is something flowery and kind of Victorian about the way he speaks, which is interesting. But I think Stephen King's often errs on the side of making his monsters speak in ways that can be a little cute, a little witty, and to me that very much cheapens the horror. I think 90% of the time a silent monster is scarier than a speaking one. So I think it's very effective that Barlow is more of a silent presence here, more of a straight monster.
Yeah, I mean the whole like cheekiness of it being gone at the end is just so much better. I mean, especially in the final like climactic scene when Ben and Mark are going in there to actually like take him down, and the film does such a good job of using that silence to its advantage, because it's all in the facial expressions, and as that's happening you see this monster with its beaming hypnotic eyes, and in the background you see the silent vampires just sloshing in the background as well through the doorway. By not having that sort of James Bond-esque like bad guy discussion between the two that is in the book, it's just so much more like, it seems weird to say realistic because we're talking about vampires, but it just seems so more effective, I guess.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see like what characters they condensed into one. Like where you have like, what was it, like Jimmy Cody's character?
Yeah, became Susan's father.
And they just kind of did that, and you had to do that when you have to shorten a series like that, But I agree, and like you said with James Mason, give him all the lines.
Give James Mason as many lines as you can possibly give him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think along those lines, though, I think while some are smart choices that are necessary, it also hurts the movie to a degree in condensing characters and lessening the impact of the town and the larger portrait of the town. It really hurts the, sort of the bigger scope that you touched on earlier about Salem's Lot, and that this is very much about a town, not just a vampire. And because we see some of the supporting characters. Fred Willard, one of the funniest men ever, plays Larry Crockett, and then he's the one who's involved in the affair. And so a lot of storylines are condensed, but it never really can touch on the darkness that sort of lingers beneath the town. in ways like the book can. I think that's just a natural limitation. It's something that we could only really fix with a longer miniseries.
Well, and to that point, it's just in terms of the book structure versus a film structure of any kind when you're doing an adaptation, whereas you can have Ben and Susan talking on a date, and then we can cut to a whole chapter, like the Lot chapters, of no dialogue and just an omniscient narrator talking for 2 paragraphs at a time about the town. You can't really do that in a film adaptation. Now, if this was a longer, like I said, like a 10-part Hulu series akin to 11/22/63, maybe you could do that because you can focus on a certain amount of characters and not have to worry about this finite 3-hour runtime of Ben Mears showing up in town, Ben Mears destroying the town in 3 hours. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, it's, to its credit, though, it's still an event. It's still, I mean, we have to think back in the context of what it was like in 1979 to be able to tune in and see this blockbuster film appear on television. Because if you think about it, and they released a condensed film version of this that really condenses all the action, so that doesn't you lose a lot of the sort of pacing and the sort of any tension that they actually had that would have felt palpable in the 3-hour runtime versus the 2-hour runtime. It still feels like a movie. It still feels like a big Hollywood film, and in a way it was. I mean, it was. I believe it was budgeted out for like $4 million, and which is pretty big for a. I mean, you got to remember Halloween was I think Halloween was made for $100,000 or $500,000 or something like that in 1978, and that was a big blockbuster film a year beforehand, and this is $4 million for a television show. I mean, that's pretty great, and the production quality for it in the 70s is pretty strong. I mean, I really love that they. Again, they obviously were going to be using far more sets and real life locations than nowadays, where you can just do a lot of green screens and stuff like that. But it does. I mean, the town feels exactly how I would see it, or it looks exactly how as I saw it in the book.
Yeah, I thought they did a great job capturing the location.
Yeah,
I mean, it really watching it, I thought, wow, this is exactly how I pictured it.
Yeah.
While I was reading it. And I just also feel like they did a good job with, I mean, some of these things I still think of, like when Danny comes to the window. I mean, like, nothing beats that. I haven't seen that done again in a way that was, like, as effective. Even though you can tell it's probably, he's on a wire, but it's so weird because it's
Ralphie?
physical.
You mean the younger brother, right?
Ralphie, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Ralphie.
Danny does show up later on.
Yeah. But Ralphie coming up, and it's just... It's so effective, and again, you don't have CGI, you don't have all these things, and sometimes when you can tell it's tangible, I don't care if it seems or looks fake.
Just great makeup.
It still resonates.
Yeah. There's an aggressive quality to the makeup that, and then also the scene with him at the window with Mark is a very, very, very unsettling scene to me that still sticks with me, and I think a lot of it has to do with the homespun nature of. And then I say homespun, only based on today's standards, but that there is sort of a simplicity and a theatrical quality to the makeup and sort of the effects. And, whether or not we see strings, it doesn't matter. There's an uncanny quality to it. Those moments when, they're witnessing the vampires through the window. I will say the one moment I remember being so disappointed by when I was a kid was I always found the death of Jimmy Cody so unsettling that he falls on this board filled with butcher knives, and it's such a gruesome death. And then I think in the movie, Susan's dad is impaled by reindeer horns.
Old James Mason, a Straker, lifts him up effortlessly, and then boom, right to the reindeer.
It's a little.
Antlers.
I know we're saying reindeer. I don't think it's reindeer, but
reindeer. Yeah, I think it was a Donner.
But yeah, just putting him on the horns. I remember being even when I was a kid, I was kind of like, "Come on, where's the butcher knives?" But
I mean, it does a really good job with the darkness. That scene where Matt opens the door and there's Mike Ryerson just sitting in the corner, and he's got the beady eyes and he's just sitting there like away removed. It's just eerie. Like it's not even like, and he just starts talking, and it's just like the way those little gold circles just like are just pop up in the darkness just is unsettling. And I think that and there's also that scene with the dinner table where Barlow pops up also.
And even that scene is lit very, it's very dark.
Yeah. I mean, it's I think it's a I do think it could have been great if Hooper, who was at that time 3 years removed from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Texas Chainsaw Massacre was what, 76, right? He's. Could you imagine what he could have done if he was a feature film? I mean, it's a what if situation, but
it was 74 for Texas.
It was 74. Okay. I do think that he could have done something a little darker. We've seen what he's done with Funhouse. We saw what he's done with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So having that in a feature film setting, I do think the film would have benefited greatly. But for being a TV movie, it doesn't. I mean, it's pretty exceptional in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm not sure that for me at least it holds up. It's not something that I necessarily enjoy watching today.
Yeah.
But I think as a good gateway into King horror, and it's definitely not one of the worst of his adaptations. There's definitely an elegance to it, and there's definitely there's definitely heart in it, and also I think just a few really smart. I think that. Some really smart adaptation choices that unfortunately due to TV, but also just the difficulty of trying to adapt this material, the cards were kind of stacked against it from the beginning, but I think with what they do, there is some really good results there.
I mean, if you do end up checking this movie out, which I actually do enjoy the film, even now, I rewatched it a couple months ago, and I was surprised, personally, I thought it still held up pretty well if you look at it from the context of when it came out, especially, if you can go back and say, okay, this is 1979, I'm sitting in front of the TV, and oh my God, this is the most terrifying vampire I've ever seen in my life. I do recommend to not check out the UK version, which is about 2 hours long.
Yeah.
They cut out an hour of the film. They cut out the bookends. They cut out the prologue and the epilogue, which you need to have.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that. It's a little more violent.
Yeah.
So there you go. It's a little more violent.
Maybe I'll like that.
Hey, a little more blood. But it just doesn't. You've cut out so much, even for a 3-hour movie. So imagine getting even more cut out for the 2-hour version. So
it's a little lean and mean.
A little lean and too lean.
Why don't we let's give it a rating? Let's rate some stuff. How about on a scale of 1 to 5 clown noses?
Ooh.
Red noses. What would you give this? I'd give it a 3 clown noses.
Oh.
Yeah, I think I'm at a 3.
3 clowns?
Yeah.
Really, I'm at an 8. 8 out of 10 or 8 out of 5.
8 out of 5.
I love it.
8 out of 5.
I'm still a 4 out of 5.
4 out of 5.
Yeah, I still think it's very good.
And you can give half clown noses.
Oh.
I was gonna say 3.5.
Oh.
All right.
Ooh.
3 little Pennywise's nose cut in half.
I think it's very good.
Again, I just felt like this really needed to be something that they delve into over 10 parts.
Yeah.
To get the feel of what Stephen King was trying to do with building this town and building the secrets. You just can't do that in a 2-hour movie, much less
if you look at it as a less obviously exaggerated version, it's probably not the best comparison. It's a false comparison, false equivalency of looking at The Shining not as a great adaptation, but as a great movie. If you can separate the book from the Salem's Lot book from what they were trying to do for the miniseries, I think it works.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I think it works. I think it works in that regard.
I'd say that averages out to 3.5 Pennywise noses. And then, but this wasn't our first trip to Salem's Lot. TNT, who's worked with King before, I think, on some miniseries, they decided to do a version of Salem's Lot in 2004, another miniseries starring Rob Lowe, who I think is pretty tight with Stephen King. He's been in The Stand. And I know he's done more, but of course I can't think of them. That's right. But he was a very important part of The Stand. But he plays Ben Mears, emo Ben Mears, I might say. The marketing for the 2004 Salem's Lot is very funny because it was kind of like nu metal era.
Yeah.
And he's sort of dressed like a member of like Puddle of Mudd or something.
Well, you got to imagine like all the suits that were like at TNT. We're just probably like, look, we got to make this guy a rocker. He's got to look really cool. And they totally are out of their element, not realizing that all that stuff was like hip like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, I think they're probably saying, hey,
if
look,
it ever
if we can't get Scott Stapp,
yeah.
I know Rob Lowe's coming off The West Wing. Can we get Rob Lowe? And
yeah. Oh God. And like, isn't there like a lot of like? It almost looks like he's wearing like eyeliner. Like,
yeah.
Almost.
No,
like,
it's hilarious.
You know.
How sort of some mixture of goth, emo, and nu metal is what he's doing, and it is a modern day adaptation that they're doing of it. But yeah, I actually have a fun story to share. It's from Rob Lowe's biography.
Oh, I read this. This is very funny.
Where he talks about. Well, we'll also say that, and we're going to talk more about this, but Rutger Hauer actually plays Barlow in this, so they're not going with the Nosferatu idea. This is a Barlow who talks. It's more akin to Stephen King's book version. But Rob Lowe has a great anecdote about working with Rutger Hauer in this final moment. And this also, I think, harkens back to the fact that Rutger Hauer sort of famously improvised his speech in Blade Runner. Mm-hmm. That everyone always talks about that. So I think that Rutger Hauer is like, well, I think if I'm going to have a last monologue in a movie, they're going to let me do it myself because of Blade Runner. So I think he wanted to do something along those lines. So in his memoir, Love Life, great name, Rob Lowe said that, he said, I once starred in a big miniseries that culminated with the villain giving a 2-page monologue trying to goad me into killing him. The actor playing the bad guy wanted to ad-lib his own version of the movie-ending speech. He's loyal. He doesn't name names.
Who else can it be?
I know.
Jamie Sheridan?
Watch it. It could have been. You know?
Although he was playing a vampire, there goes Jamie Sheridan. He went into a soliloquy about being a cowboy. The director was not impressed. After a very tense negotiation, the actor was forced to shit-can his self-penned opus and stick to the original script. But there was only one problem. He hadn't bothered to learn it. So they put cue cards next to Rob Lowe's head so Rutger Hauer could read those. So I think that's a good summation of how sloppy and not altogether elegant or effective the 2004 version of Salem's Lot is.
Well, the movie itself on paper, you think the casting is good. I mean, Andre Braugher.
Yeah, I was going to say.
You want to talk about going progressive? He plays a gay black version of Matt Burke, and you've got James Cromwell as Father Callahan, who even now when I read The Dark Tower, I picture him as Callahan. Donald Sutherland is playing Straker,
which is great because it is kind of a tongue-in-cheek reference to 1990s Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is because they were opposing forces in that.
Not to mention
which might have been 1992. I think it's 92. And also.
And Sutherland sort of plays Straker a bit like Renfield from Dracula. He's like a little bit like.
Eccentric?
I mean, he's not eating spiders and whatnot.
Yeah, but he's a little crazy.
He's a little crazy. He's a little eccentric, I guess you could definitely say. He's as playful as I would say Barlow is in a novel. Like, you can picture him being the one that writes these letters to the.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But again, on paper, everything seems great. And it loses whatever humanity is in the book for a lot of these supporting characters because everybody in the movie is pretty much awful or does awful. Everybody does awful things. There's no salvageable character or character you are rooting for, really.
Would you say that there is a difference in the fact, and I mean, obviously this takes place when it came out. It took place when it came out. It wasn't trying to take place in the 70s.
Yeah. In
terms of like what small towns are today versus back then, do you think there was something that was also missing there?
Absolutely.
I didn't feel like. I mean, this is the first thing that I ever saw in relation to Salem's Lot. I watched this series.
Yeah.
So this is what I based everything off of originally, and I was trying really hard to remember it, and I had tried to forget it so hard because it's not very good. And but I do think there's something hugely lost there in terms of the small town element. It just isn't what it used to be.
I guess I always kind of pictured Salem's Lot as more pastoral,
Yes,
and I think that's not something that can necessarily be applied to a lot of small towns in modern society, and I think it loses something. Like I think we talked a lot about Salem's Lot being idyllic, but I think maybe looks wise, like as a town, it was what's inside that was dark, and we lose a lot of that. I think in the Rob Lowe version.
I think also. Just in terms of how effects heavy this is, you think about the TV version where Marjorie Glick slowly rises up and the sheet falls from her face and she's asking for her dead son. Whereas in this version, Marjorie Glick is literally in the air, spinning in circles and just screaming and going crazy.
Yeah.
And then you've got near the end where Straker appears in the kitchen, which is a terrifying scene in the movie and the book for that matter. And he's crawling on the ceiling, like spinning people's necks around. It's just the worst kind of horror, the CGI horror, which I can't stand.
But that's more to do. I mean, that has more to do with just the culture.
The culture, absolutely.
Filmmaking
the times,
as it is.
Yeah, the CGI is really, really bad. That's something I recall, and I think that's always sort of, I don't know. I mean, even to this day, I mean, CGI. Blood today still looks like shit.
Yeah, I never look at CGI does not belong in horror unless it's going to be something where it actually warrants it. The story warrants it. You just can't put CGI in horror. It just doesn't blend well.
I think one of the biggest crimes, though, of this version of Salem's Lot is what they do with Father Callahan.
Well, I mean, because I'd read the Dark Tower. Well, all the Dark Tower had come out by this point, and so when the movie opens, I'm thinking, oh my God, they're really going to adhere to the whole Dark Tower mythos, where you've got Father Callahan working in it's not in New York, but he's still in a soup kitchen. And then go ahead with the description, because then they just destroy that character.
Well, it's very bizarre because clearly the film was trying to pay homage to the Dark Tower series, where we find Father Callahan working in a soup kitchen in a larger city, and so the movie begins with Ben Mears, Rob Lowe, seeing him there, and then instead of perhaps, I don't know, like engaging or talking to him, there's a fight, and they actually get into this huge fight and fly through a window and fall down several stories, and then like Ben is bloody and broken and being carried off into an ambulance, and he's on the verge of death. And they ask him, why would you? This is a man of the faith, like why would you, or man of the cloth, like why would you attack him like this? And he just says, Jerusalem's Lot. And then he tells the story, and that's sort of the framing device. And then we see later in the movie when Father Callahan has turned into a vampire, he there's not the complicated, weird, his faith has mutated whatever was put into him, and he's become this weird hybrid of living and dead thing. And there's a sadness to that, and he gets on the bus, and that's how it is in the book. Here, he literally just becomes evil.
The de facto leader at the end.
Yeah, he's like the de facto leader in the end, and then he, when he escapes in the end, it's like he's going to go terrorize the city, like go terrorize the world. And so the way it's kind of played is then Mark comes and sees Rob Lowe in the epilogue of it in the hospital and basically finds out that Father Callahan is there and goes, and I think he smothers him, yeah?
Yeah, that's why he kills him.
Yeah, he smothers him and kills him, and then he kind of says to Rob Lowe, they're gone, and then Rob Lowe can die in peace.
Yeah, and then I think the nurse earlier sees Mark, after he's heard the story, he lets Mark leave or whatever.
Yeah.
Let him go.
Oh, it's so silly. And it's just kind of like, you're going to adhere to the story, but you're using it, you're perverting it at the same time.
It's the same thing they did with the remake of Carrie, where they changed the entire idea of what this is supposed to be about, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah, we talked about how you can make changes to books and your adaptations and have them work. The Barlow Vampire obviously works very well in the 79 version. But this is definitely an example of changes that were made where it doesn't fly.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a shame. I mean, it's just a waste of resources.
Agreed.
Because you have just so much talent that just gets like pushed to the side. But I'm not surprised. I mean, it's the TV was not where it was. I mean, especially not like, cable television like TNT where it is today. I mean, I imagine if you did a remake of sorts to another Salem's Lot television show, I'm sure it would be a lot better today. We're definitely a little more self-aware, or networks are definitely more self-aware of just the sort of level of television that you can create that can kind of match like film, and also not have to be so designed to the times. One of the things that's interesting of watching the 2004 version and as opposed to stuff that's coming around today is that I feel like there's less of a reliance on making sure that modern audiences are situated and understanding like the surroundings by setting it in that time. Like I feel like if they did it again today, I feel like you could almost even set it in the 70s or the 80s, and people would, especially now after Stranger Things, where people would be like, oh, I totally can buy that.
Right.
And I don't know what that says about the culture today, where we're just trying to keep reaching back into the past, but there was it feels to me that sort of nostalgia was just non-existent back in the 2000s or like the early aughts. It was just like,
it's like what Randall says, very into this emo Creed,
yeah,
Nickelback.
It was the worst era.
It was the worst era for music. It was a bad.
So anything set during that era sucks. So it's like it's Ty West, who's a filmmaker, has done House of the Devil and Innkeepers, and recently he did In a Valley of Violence. When Consequence of Sound spoke to him, he had talked about how he didn't want to like set horror movies in the modern times anymore, because it's impossible to make an effective horror movie, or not impossible.
Well, everybody's present now in your life.
Yeah,
just a phone call away.
There's no such thing as isolation.
There's no isolation.
So you can't. So Salem's Lot doesn't work in that, because the minute you see something, you're like, oh my god, like, well, let me just dial up, text somebody.
And that's the other thing about the 70s is, a town essentially could disappear.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, and I was going to say, there's just, back then, there's stories, there's I don't know, like, there's ghost stories, there's lore, where now, a lot of that stuff, you don't have campfire stories that, can't be dispelled, or by looking it up in Google in 2 seconds, you know what I mean?
We have creepypasta.
There's no, like, urban myths that, like, really are, like, people just don't know if it's true or not, you know what I mean? Like, there's just too much communication. It's very hard to make a horror film today about being alive today, or, you know what I mean? Like, it's just
no more
really
campfires.
difficult. Which is why I think people are so, not necessarily nostalgic, but is why they set these things in times where it would have been believable.
Mm-hmm.
Where everything was more difficult.
Where the town didn't believe the boy who cried wolf, because it just seems too impossible.
I will say it's interesting that, not to I don't know if you had any more to talk about.
Oh, I'm good. Oh, do you want to give it the Pennywise?
Yeah, I think we'll have to do Pennywise noses after your final assessment here.
Well, yeah, because I was going to say that the radio show, which is from '95, they update the times in that one, and it does. They're far more effective, but we can discuss that.
We'll discuss that after we give Pennywise noses.
It's very important we give out these Pennywise noses.
I'm going to give the Rob Lowe Salem's Lot 1.5 Pennywise noses.
Why 1.5?
Because I kind of like the emo stuff.
Do you like ironically though?
Do you like saliva?
I love saliva.
All right, sorry.
Just kidding, I hate saliva.
I like watching Rob Lowe, so like, because I think he's really hot. So
he is a
I actually like I could see him as Ben Mears more than Nick Andros for some reason. So it's interesting in that regard. But this movie's just garbage. I'm giving it 1.
Ooh,
one Pennywise nose?
Just one Pennywise nose.
Oh, Pennywise nose.
Well, I'll say, it's not a good film. I'm giving it 1 Pennywise nose for Rob Lowe, because I do love the Lowe. I love him. I hope he comes back and does another Stephen King property at some point.
Yeah?
I give it that extra 0.5 nose, literally for the only scene I ever remember from this, which is the scene that I actually dislike the most, which is where they jump out the window.
Yeah,
and Father
it's
Callahan.
so
It's
bad.
the only thing I remember seeing. I think it was in the preview, and it was like the only thing that stuck with me.
It's so bizarre.
I too will go with Randall. I guess. Did you give it away? Would you give it a 1.5? Is that what you said?
I did give it.
Okay, I gave it a 1.5 as well, because they do have the school bus scene.
Yes, they do have the school bus scene.
And the school bus scene does work.
But then the school bus... Then
driver drives it to like a KI.
Well, he starts like trying to chase.
Yes.
There's like a chase scene with Rob Lowe, and then the school bus driver is like chasing him, and then drives into a gas station.
And that's what sets the town on fire.
Yeah,
it's bad. But the school bus scene where they attack him,
it is
does
good.
Work. It's good.
And also, kudos to them for having Andre Braugher play a black gay school teacher in a small town,
which is a precursor to his
and
role.
a younger version of the character too. So younger, blacker, and gayer, I guess.
Well, he plays in Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
He's also
interesting.
Yeah, very good.
Gay police chief,
great. Then let's move on. You mentioned it a little bit, but let's talk about the BBC radio series.
Yeah, it's when we were tasked in our different projects this week, and originally everyone threw out the 3.5 hour radio show, a part of me was like, are you nuts? First off, I'm not really good with audiobooks because I just, it's the same reason why I can never have conversations on telephones or on cell phones, just because I get distracted easily. And I'll start zoning off on something else, and then I'll go, oh wait, no, I'm supposed to be listening to something right now. This, surprisingly, I was hooked in immediately, which is really shocking to me because I've tried listening to audiobooks before, even with people I really love, like like James Vanderbeek narrating some of Bret Easton Ellis's books, which is funny because he was in Rules of Attraction. So I tried listening to that and I couldn't. I started losing it. I just couldn't stay in tune. What's great about this production is just the production. I mean, not to joke around, that it's really layered. I mean, it feels like, it's a radio drama, so it's very old school. So you have the sound effects. So if they're outside, you're going to hear the nature outside. If they're indoors, you hear like the wood that's like that they're walking on the wooden floors. When they touch doorknobs, you actually hear the door, like the hand like holding onto it and then turning the things, and it almost feels like they actually filmed the movie, but they just gave you the audio at points, and for that it was really interesting to see, and a part of me was actually imagining them doing this in the studio, and like I just imagine like Radioland Murders when like Christopher Lloyd just like making like he's doing the gaffer, he's like the gaffer and everything. But so there's a great sense of atmosphere, and that's such a huge part of this book. So I really dug it in that sense, and a lot of the changes weren't too jarring. They had to condense a lot of the dialogue to make it a little more natural, because I was actually following along with the book at some points because I just got so addicted to it that I went home and just started following along with the book. And it was interesting seeing how fast they would jump ahead, because they would either skip sections sometimes, or the dialogue would just have like the gist of it, and to that point you really do get a good sense of how dedicated they were to the story, because little details that would be described in King's graphs would be used for atmosphere. So, for example, like when Susan comes home, or Susan's like in her room and her mother like confronts her about Ben. In the book, they talk about how she has like Cream magazine like things on her wall, and like some old rock and roll stars and such, and so they use that to its advantage, so that when they are actually in the room, you hear her talk, like listening to some of the old like rock and roll acts and stuff. And the same thing with like when they go to Matt Burke's house, he had mentioned there's the dialogue in the story of them like, oh, I took you as for an older, I didn't figure, Ben says something to Matt saying like, oh, I didn't take you for being into rock and roll, and he like likes the oldies. But when you go to Matt's, it's like he's listening to like, you hear like Dancing in the Dark and like My Hometown, which is like by Bruce Springsteen, and so the soundtrack's great. Like even when Ben's going into town, you hear One of These Nights by the Eagles, and that's what my one Eagles song I actually really like.
We love the Eagles.
Oh yeah, it's a shame that Dan's not on and didn't listen to that, because he would have gone nuts on it. Our Dan Caffrey is a noted Eagles scholar, and cried over Glenn Frey's death over David Bowie. So that tells you something about him. But there are some there are some issues. But the one thing I do want to single out is the theme that runs through this. It's this like weird clock sort of this like clock sound, almost like that sounds like the bell chiming at midnight, paired with like this kind of synthy organ thing, is so good that I have been like trying to find it online because just to have myself. It's like 4 notes, but it sets the mood so well. It feels like the save points in like the old Resident Evil video game, like where you would just be this kind of like sort of tranquil, like you're waking up like out of a dream, and I loved it. For being such a long book, and the fact that they were able to condense it into 3.5 hours is pretty compelling. I mean, the difference is that Ralphie Glick's role is reduced. Dud and the Junkyard only get like a cursory mention. There's some weird situations where Barlow actually hypnotizes like Glick and Ryerson in the like she like hypnotizes Mike Ryerson when he's in the cemetery scene. So that was kind of interesting.
So we get more Barlow in the adaptation. It sounds like
almost, yeah, a little bit, which is great because Doug Bradley of Hellraiser fame does the voice, which is awesome.
Oh, wow.
Biggest star that's on there for sure. And the whole thing is a confession to the priest. So the priest actually comes in occasionally, and that's a good way to for them to get the story across.
There's three different adaptations. I mean, there's three different bookends. There's three different prologues and epilogues for each adaptation.
That's interesting.
Yeah, but so I would give this if I'm going on the Pennywise thing.
Yeah,
4.5.
Wow,
I really dug it.
That's a near masterpiece.
And I think I'm a little biased just because I was so blown away that I actually liked radio drama because I'm I'm not into them, but I really dug it, and just somebody take the tracks that Mark did to get somebody new.
And it's available on YouTube
It is available all on YouTube. I was able to find. I was able to listen to it on YouTube when I was at work, and then there was a site that was out there that had all of them in MP3s, and I just kind of created an album out of it. So
cool.
It's great.
Well, 4.5 Pennywise noses is pretty impressive, and I'm sure that we're going to give the same amount of Pennywise noses to our next adaptation. Oh, it's not even an adaptation; it's a standalone film called A Return to Salem's Lot.
Well, Randall, you're the only one here that didn't watch this.
No, I missed this one.
So I have to tell you that you are wrong. That we are not going to be giving this 4.5 Pennywise noses.
I don't even know if this will get a rating.
I'll give it a rating.
Oh yeah, I know. I'm talking. I don't know if it'll get any no's.
We watched this a couple days ago. I'd never seen it. This was definitely one of those movies that you would see at the video store when you were younger. The cover is basically the same cover as Salem's Lot. You see the Barlow '79 adaptation vampire hovering over this town. There is more. That has more to do with the original novel than anything that actually happens in the film. Well, long story short, Larry Cohen wrote and directed this. He also wrote and directed the It's Alive films.
And Phone Booth.
And Phone Booth, starring Kiefer Sutherland.
Who was a vampire.
And Colin Farrell, also a vampire.
Which is funny because he was Kiefer Sutherland was a vampire in Lost Boys, which came out
in
the year that this did.
So basically, guys, this movie doesn't deserve a lot of attention, but we're going to give it a lot of attention.
Oh, yeah.
I've got a lot of notes here that I made during the film. It's important to know that there were 3 vampire movies this year. People always talk about how Near Dark, what's got the better legacy, Near Dark or Lost Boys? But people always forget about A Return to Salem's Lot. I just don't know why.
Isn't that something someone actually said online?
Listen, that's the other thing. This movie it's developed a kind of a cult over the years.
For no reason.
I mean, there's some analogies in this film, to be sure, about small town life in America and taxes.
Holocaust deniers.
And Holocaust deniers, the old favorite horror trope. But here's something that we discovered also. So this was actually released in theaters in 1987 by Warner Brothers. And on its Warner Brothers 1987 slate, it was followed by Witches of Eastwick and Full Metal Jacket. So they had quite the spring summer.
I think.
Also of note, though, this is the first Stephen King sequel. This is the first sequel to a Stephen King adaptation. As far as
at the time.
At the time, this is the first one.
Yeah.
That thing, there's been no sequels to The Shining or Carrie.
Can we really call this a sequel?
Well, that's the question. Because it's set in Salem's Lot.
Jerusalem's Lot.
It's set in
and
Jerusalem's
they
Lot.
have the sign.
And they have the sign.
And that's it.
Because these vampires have apparently been there for
300 years.
300 years, centuries.
I mean, so they absolutely forget the fact that the place burned down.
Yeah, the place is fine. So it's basically been this vampire town for hundreds of years. Right there, why even bother calling this thing A Return to Salem's Lot?
And is it set in 1987?
It's set in 87.
Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely set in 1987.
But let me jump in here.
Okay.
The strangest thing about it is that the main character is going back to this town. He's inherited a home that his aunt had in Salem's Lot. But if it was always supposed to be this vampire town for 300 years, so why is he not a vampire? Why is his aunt only now just become a vampire? It's just really stupid.
Yeah.
It's bad. And the way that the town is still able to function is because they've got some actual human beings still in town. They call them drones.
They bred these drones to run the town for them
during the day. A couple notes I have here I need to read. The great Ronnie Blakely, who is in A Nightmare on Elm Street as the mother, She was nominated for the Academy Award for Nashville. She's in a 5-second cameo in the very beginning, shipping off the son of our main character, played by Emmy Award winner Michael Moriarty, who is absolutely awful in this movie. It's incredible.
Deaf.
It's incredible.
This. Oh, bad. He's awful.
Mike and Mac, feel free to jump in.
I'll tell you one thing.
Blowing through here.
For the American Pie fans that are our listeners,
yes.
You'll be pleased to know that a young Tara Reid is in the film, and she's just as great as an actress then as she is today. So
gives it her all, which is not a lot.
Much like vampires stopped aging, she stopped learning how to act around that same time. Apparently, shots fired.
Shots fired.
I mean, this movie is such a mess that at some point during the screening, we just started basically creating our own sort of movie of what must have been going through the fucking studio heads' minds when they were trying to market this thing, because it's the type of film that even as a direct-to-video sequel would have been just so disappointing. Like, I mean, it's just staggeringly disappointing. Like, you would take it home and you would get 20 minutes into it and you would bring it back and say, like, look, I just was at this video store an hour ago. Can you please let me get something else instead of, me having to return
I
this
didn't
right
watch
now.
the whole thing.
I didn't watch the whole thing.
It's in fine condition.
It is. It's boring. There's the gore when they actually have. There's a part where the woman who's supposed to be a vampire opens her mouth and she has no fangs, and they focus on her teeth. Like it's as if like the makeup department stepped out for a day, and they're like, let's fuck it, just wing it. Like
there are no fangs in this film.
None.
They don't really like eating humans. They eat cows primarily, and it's more that they want this guy to come in who's a really poor substitute for Ben Mears. This guy is like a documentarian, and he comes in, and they want him to write this Bible so that in like 200 or 300 years from now, there's a record of this town of vampires that were able to live. And who cares?
I mean, it's also, as you learn, not only does it suck, maybe pun intended, I don't know.
Yeah.
So we'll say pun intended. It's presented as a dark comedy.
Yeah. Kind of.
But it's not funny.
No.
The commentary is not there. It's not scary at all. It's a confusing mess of a movie. It feels like the only reason the movie got made is because Larry Cohen made some weird deal to make the It's Alive movies. Because It's Alive 3 came out, I think, the same month as this came out. So. And
what's funny is that Larry Cohen actually really wanted to remake House of Wax. And they were like, I don't think so. But we can take the Salem's Lot property and we'll let you do It's Alive 3. So it just seems like he probably was just phoning in like the entire film. I mean, there's a scene.
So you wouldn't call this a passion project?
Oh my God, no! This is no. And the only thing I could describe this is just I don't know. I can't even describe it. It's a lifeless,
it's a mess,
pointless film that at one point I think we were also like hoping that it would just turn into a film about the cows. We just wanted them to follow the cows that they were eating on. I mean, I don't know.
Were they grass-fed cows?
They were grass-fed cows, to be fair. They were healthy cows.
Those vampires,
they're eating good.
It's got to be top-notch.
They weren't pumped with any chemicals.
All right, I take it back. It seems like it's a fuck you movie. It seems like Larry Cohen was basically like, oh, you making me make this movie? I'm going to make an anti-everything about this film. It's not going to be scary. The vampires are not going to be really vampires. They're not going to feed after people. They're going to go after cows. Like, I mean,
and the movie ends on a shot of cows, by the way, which we couldn't believe.
Yeah, I mean, it's and then
the most effective parts of the movie are like literally the last 10 minutes where they're burning the town and they start to finally use some effects, which make no sense because you haven't set these characters up to be anything but just regular humans. That you never see fangs again. It just doesn't make sense. It's a slog. Mike.
There's one scene, and this basically sums up the entire film, where Tara Reid's character walks away. The child. She's a child who was sexually attracted to the other child, also in this bizarre, weird ass Wicker Man style movie. That she walks away from all the commotion, everything's burning on fire, and goes into a burning coffin and lays there and kills herself. And that is a summary for the entire film.
I wanted to
That's
do that.
what you want to do.
Poor decision making.
Yeah.
Nonsensical. Yes, of course. Perfect
Well, on that
representation.
note, I think it's time for Pennywise noses.
Yeah.
Oh, please, yes.
Mike, how many Pennywise noses would you give Return to Salem's Lot?
0.
A big 0.
Yeah.
I know we usually don't try to go below 1, but I'll give it half a Pennywise nose.
I don't know where you got that roll.
Because it had a title with Salem.
Oh no, because there's a so bad it's good moment where there's this awful stand-in for the Barlow Nosferatu vampire. It's like this blue rubber mask thing with this blue rubbery hands that at one point watches two people having sex and just kind of stands there and watches it happen. Never see it.
And then when there's dialogue for it later on, they just keep cutting to behind him
to ADR, and
because I
it's
guess
sad.
the person that was in the makeup couldn't actually talk in the makeup.
The movie's almost it's like an hour and 40 minutes. It's unbelievably long, but a fun little tidbit here. If you subscribe to us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, we will do you the favor of posting a photo of that blue vampire I was discussing, so you don't have to actually go out there and seek it out yourself. We're going to give it to you, the listener. That's our gift to you, the listener.
I'm giving it 0.
0 Pennywise noses?
It doesn't. No noses.
I'm going to give your guys' discussion of it 3 Pennywise noses.
Ooh,
I thought it was
it
was a spirited discussion, but I could have used a little more insight into the cinematography of the film.
Oh yeah.
No,
I guess this is kind of like a prelude to where we would go when there are no adaptations. But I mean, if you really think about it, if there hasn't really been an essential, I guess the essential adaptation is Tobe Hooper's version.
Yes.
in '79. But do you think there should be? Do we think there should still be a really good film?
I think there is still like I said, more likely for a Hulu 10-part series on Salem. So I find that one season shot. I think it's definitely out there.
Too soon?
No, I don't think it's too soon at all. Because the 2004 movie series, you can't even find it anywhere now.
It's not even available
for
streaming.
So
Can't get it.
I bemoan, I hate remakes and everything else, but I think there is still a great adaptation that you could do.
Who plays Ben Mears?
Oh boy, I needed more time for this. Oh my god.
We bring back Lowe.
Yeah. Oh, Lowe's going to be in it. I don't know who he's going to be.
He could play Larry Crockett.
I don't know. At what point can we bring him back? He'll probably be Matt.
He can play Matt.
I think Bruno Mars should play Ben Mears.
Wearing the hat. He's just wearing the hat. This is great. Have you read Air Dance? I do it.
I think when I started reading it, I was picturing Adam Driver.
Ooh, that would be good. He'd be great.
Oh,
yeah. I would pick his co-star John Boyega as Ben Mears.
I think he could be a great Ben Mears.
Yeah, I think.
I thought you were gonna say like he'd be like Matt Burke or something.
No. So they totally
they
rip
really
off
go younger and younger and younger.
No, I just wanted to make a Force Awakens joke. I honestly, I don't know. I don't know who would be.
Hey guys, Chris Pratt or go home.
Oh yeah, right. Let me tell you.
I think that if they were going to redo it, I think that I'd like it to still be set in the 70s.
Yes.
I don't want them to try to update it.
Absolutely.
I think that could be really neat. And I think that, but I think at this point, I don't know if I don't know, do you think a straight adaptation of it is what the world wants or needs? It's like what vampires are such a great they're such a great metaphor in horror. They represent so much in terms of iconography and everything. And I'm just curious, what does a modern vampire movie look like? Because Salem's Lot is such a traditional one, or maybe it's time to go back to just traditional stuff. I mean,
I think I would say we go back to the 70s for it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned, because we already kind of had the vampire renaissance. I mean, wasn't even the writer of Heathers did one Vampire Academy like a few years ago, and that flopped. And I think that was kind of the nail on the coffin.
Hey.
I think
stake in the heart.
I mean, vampires got cute all of a sudden, so I think we're eventually going to reach that point where it's like, what can make vampires scary again?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, even there's What We Do in the Shadows, which I love, but it's a comedy about vampires, and it's all played for laughs, and so I think that it could be neat. I think that if you want to get to like get down to the basics in terms of what makes vampires scary. There's worse choices than Salem's Lot to do it.
Yeah, I think you got to make vampires scary again. I mean, the problem with what happened with the genre is Stephanie Meyer made it alluring and sexy, and that was kind of one of the reasons. That was always my problem with the Twilight series, and many other problems. But is the sense that like it became like there was no reason to not be a vampire in that. Like they could go out in the daylight because they sparkle. Oh no. And they are young forever. They could fly. They have superhuman strength. They can beat the shit out of werewolves. Like, there's no reason to ever be scared of, like, if somebody came out running after me, he's like, I'm going to turn you a vampire. And be like, well, I'm 32 right now, and I want to be that forever. Take me, please.
They defanged the vampire.
They defanged the vampire. So I think what you need to do maybe in the next one, if you did do Salem's Lot, would maybe go back into some sort of, like, body horror thing. Like, we're such a vain society. Maybe you make it so that the vampire, you turn into this twisted monster. It's like that you can't, you're not only that, but you're separated from your own life, and from there's no, you can't have like, you don't have no identity. You're not in the mirrors. You're not in you're not taken into photos. You're not in like, your entire identity gets taken away, and you are just this twisted, contorted monster that's going to live forever. And that's kind of scary if you can convey that without having to rely on some of the older tropes. And maybe that's one way to go about it. I don't know, but I mean, I guess the bottom line is that I just think it would be great if Topher Grace plays Ben Mears.
No.
Dad, can we go now?
You ready?
Yeah, we've been ready for an hour.
Okay, I'll be right there.
You said that a half hour ago. Yeah, my dad's weird. He gets like that when he's writing.
I give Salem's Lot, on a scale of 5 red clown noses, I give it a solid 4. Salem's Lot is and I'm not being generous here because I want to leave space to grow. Yeah. And I think a 4 is solid because it's probably one of my favorite Stephen King books, but there are parts about it that I think there are times when it's a little overwritten, it might be a little overlong. And I think that the climax isn't executed perhaps as great, and as we all know, there's always, Stephen King's endings can be a little bit unsatisfying at times. But, what I really love about Salem's Lot is the ensemble nature of it, the sense that we're looking at a town rather than just a series of characters. Like, there's a real sense of unity there. And then also, just a really good, solid, freaky story. I think there's a lot of, strength in this book. There's a lot of horror. There's a lot of, images that really last with me to this day. So yeah, I'd say 4 red clown noses, and I'm going to throw it over to Mike.
Yeah, I would. I think I would also go with red 4 clown noses. Pennywise would definitely gives his stamp of approval to this one. I think that if he found it in the sewer, he'd be like, "What is this book?" But it's not my favorite of Stephen King's books. I'd probably put it in my top 10 though. Maybe not my top 5. Just because it's, again, like what Randall was saying, we have a lot of King to get through. But what I do love about this is that while it is overwritten, it does feel like he just kind of put it all out there to see what works. It's kind of his like spaghetti against the wall sort of novel, where he was going to see how far how deep he could go with the characters, how wide he could go with the setting. I do think that for having the the thrills and the chills, I think he could have had a little bit more of the chills in this.
A few more spills.
Maybe a few more spills. I think Cody spilled enough blood for us. But I just think like there wasn't, for me, like, for being generally a pretty scary topic and story. I do struggle, the cemetery area, this episode actually was kind of hard for me to find some areas. Like there are like 2, notable sequences that I pulled out, but it's not like, Pet Sematary, which we'll eventually get to, where I would have like a top 20 moments that are just absolutely terrify me. Like this one just didn't. This one was more about the intrigue of the mythology, if you will. And I think a lot of that is supported by the 2 short stories that you get involved in this, and the fact that like King really goes deep with the town here, and that's kind of what my favorite part about this book is that he really goes wild in being able to paint this portrait of small town America, and for that it definitely gets a 4 for me, just in that sense. So that's where I'm at on that.
4 red clown noses.
4 red clown
Pennywise
noses.
would approve. And let's move on to Mac.
I have to give it 3.5 clown noses. And that's still a good amount of clown noses.
Absolutely a good amount of clown noses.
I think that what King does here is pretty great in terms of world building. I love to see the town slowly built. I think the reason there aren't as many creeptastic moments for the cemetery is because there is so much building. So that when those creepy moments do happen, you are surprised at how much you care about the characters.
Yeah.
And that to me was more worth it this time around.
Mm-hmm.
Not that there's a lot of crazy, creepy stuff going on in Carrie, but it's definitely interesting to see that he does that. Yeah. So I would have to say 3.5 clown noses. I'm really excited to see where we go next. Yeah, that's about it.
We're going to The Shining.
Yeah, The Shining is
We're
next.
going to the mountains of
The
Colorado.
Old Overlook Hotel.
Mac, we have a room for you at the Overlook Hotel, and it's 218, right next to 217.
Oh.
So
That's like where nothing happened.
Yeah, I think you're safe in that room. And
keep it down in there.
Actually, you got the presidential suite.
Let's move on over to Justin Gerber.
Well, not to spoil future episodes, I would also give it the old 4 clown noses out of 5. I still I will say this now, so I'll tease it out. I have not read The Dead Zone in about 15 years, but I have reread his other 70s novels, and I think this is his best novel from the 70s.
Interesting.
Even over The Shining.
Even over The Shining, and even over
The Stand.
Even over The Stand.
Whoa!
Hot take over here.
Hot take. So
let's just call him Hot Take Gerber.
Look for that 2 months from now, everybody. No,
stay tuned.
And, it's a testament to King here also because again, I kind of was critical of the main villain of Salem's Lot earlier on, but the world building he does here is great.
Yeah.
Again, the Lot chapters are excellent. They build and they build and they build, and the scariest moments in the book for me are actually found in the Lot chapters, mostly I guess the Lot 3, I think it is.
Yeah.
All the building blocks are found in this book, what he would do going forward. And it's just a huge leap forward from Carrie, just in terms of its structure and how it's told. And I don't know, I was pretty invigorated. I was invigorated throughout the whole piece. Again, I don't give it 5 because he would do, in my opinion, some great work in the next decade. In the decades to follow, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm going to go with the 4 out of 5. Check out Salem's Lot movie as well, the 1979 TV adaptation.
I will say this: if you're giving it 4, I do wonder what you're going to give The Stand now. If there is no 3.7 clown nose,
I could also give The Stand 4, but if you ask me to separate what I think is
what
better,
is better,
then maybe spoiler alert.
You're getting close to a pitchfork rating system over
yeah,
there.
3.9.
King Fork.
I give it a MOON.
Yeah.
MOON.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Losers Club, a Stephen King podcast from Consequence of Sound. This was a good one, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with The Shining, where we'll be talking about the book. And then, in addition to the classic Jack Nicholson, Stanley Kubrick version of The Shining, we'll be talking about the much maligned TV version starring Steven Weber. And we might even touch on Dr. Sleep a little bit, and of course we'll have our own episode on that many, many years from now. So yeah, thanks so much for listening. And also please remember to subscribe to the podcast in iTunes or Stitcher. And also if you could leave us a review, those really do help us in terms of getting the podcast out there and getting us noticed and things like that. And of course, we're always open to suggestions, things that you're interested in, what you'd like us to talk about, and things like that. We very much want this to be a community, and we want to engage with you guys. So find us on social media as well. And thanks so much. We'll talk to you in 2 weeks.
I got some hot friends. God, I got some hot friends. I got some hot friends. God, I got some hot friends. But you know you want somebody to treat you good.
Consequence Podcast Network.